Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've been living in Kentucky my whole life. Born and raised in the backwoods where people learn to fend for themselves. City folks wouldn't understand the relationship we have with nature out here. It's not all moonshine and banjos like they show on TV. The forests here are ancient, filled with secrets, and I've spent most of my adult life exploring them. Ginseng hunting has been my thing for nearly 15 years now. It's good money if you know where to look, and I know these woods better than most. Every September, when the season opens, I'm out there with my digger and collection bag, searching for those distinctive red berries that mark where the valuable roots grow. I'm used to the wilderness and its inhabitants. Black bears are common around here, and I've had my fair share of encounters. They're usually skittish creatures that bolt as soon as they catch your scent. In all my years foraging, I've never felt unsafe. The forest and I had an understanding. At least that's what I thought until last fall. It was early October, perfect ginseng hunting weather. The leaves were just starting to turn, creating that golden canopy overhead that makes the whole forest glow. I headed out to a spot near the Daniel Boone National Forest border, a place I'd harvested from for years. It was about a 45-minute hike from where I parked my truck, far enough away that most casual foragers wouldn't bother. I remember checking my watch when I got started. It was around 7:30 in the morning. The air was crisp, maybe 50 degrees, with that fall dampness that makes the forest smell so rich. I was wearing my usual gear, heavy jeans, flannel shirt, work boots, and a light jacket. Had my digger, collection bag, water bottle, some beef jerky, and a machete I always carry for clearing brush and as a precaution. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Anyone who spends time in the woods knows they're never actually quiet. There's always birds calling, squirrels, rustling, wind in the leaves. But that morning there was this absence, no bird song at all. I remember thinking it was odd, but I didn't dwell on it. Sometimes a hawk flies over and everything goes quiet for a bit, so I just figured that's what happened. I found a good patch and got to work. Ginseng hunting is methodical. You move slowly, scanning for the distinctive leaf pattern and those bright red berries. When you find a plant, you carefully dig around it to get the whole root intact. It's peaceful work that requires concentration. About an hour in, I was kneeling down, working on extracting a particularly good root when the hair on the back of my neck stood up. You know that feeling when you suddenly know you're not alone? It wasn't like someone was nearby, it was like someone was staring a hole through me. I froze with my hands still in the dirt. My first thought was bear, but this felt different. Bears don't stare at you. They either run away or they charge. This was a watching feeling. I slowly turned my head to look over my shoulder, trying not to make any sudden movements. That's when I saw it. About 20 yards away, partially hidden behind a red oak, was something I still struggled to describe. It was standing upright, like a man, but much bigger. 7 feet tall at least, maybe closer to 8. It was covered in dark, reddish-brown hair that hung in matted clumps. Its shoulders were massive, easily twice as wide as mine, and I'm not a small guy. But it was the face that made my blood run cold. It had this flat, wide nose and deep-set eyes under a pronounced brow ridge. Those eyes, they were looking right at me with an intelligence that was unmistakably aware. Not animal awareness. It knew what I was, and it was deliberately hiding, watching me. The tree it was standing behind wasn't particularly large, maybe 14 inches in diameter, so most of its body was visible. One massive hand was gripping the side of the tree, and I could see fingers. Not claws, not paws. Fingers with opposable thumbs, just oversized and covered in hair. Time seemed to stop. I don't know how long we stared at each other. Could have been 10 seconds. Could have been a minute. My mind was racing through all the possibilities of what I was seeing, but there was only one that made sense, no matter how impossible it seemed. I was looking at a Sasquatch, a goddamn Bigfoot, right there in the Kentucky woods I'd been hunting in my whole life. My mouth went dry as cotton. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Everything in me wanted to run, but some primal part of my brain kept me still. Running triggers predators. That's wilderness knowledge 101. So I did something that still surprises me when I think back on it. I slowly stood up, keeping my movements deliberate and non-threatening. Then I spoke out loud, my voice shaking but clear. "I'm leaving now. I don't mean any harm." The creature didn't move, just kept watching me with those deeply intelligent eyes. I could see its chest moving as it breathed, slow, deep breaths. It wasn't afraid of me at all. I started backing away, never turning my back to it. My machete was strapped to my belt, but I didn't reach for it. Somehow I knew that would be a mistake. The thing could have closed the distance between us in seconds if it wanted to. As I backed away, the creature shifted slightly, adjusting its position to keep me in sight. The movement was so human-like, it sent chills down my spine. There was purpose and thought behind every subtle motion. It took me nearly 20 minutes to back up the distance I'd hiked in 45. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. The creature didn't follow, at least not that I could see, but I felt those eyes on me the entire time. When I finally reached my truck, my legs were shaking so badly I could barely climb in. I fumbled with my keys, started the engine, and got out of there as fast as the dirt roads would allow. It wasn't until I was halfway home that a terrifying thought hit me. What if there had been more than one? Everything I've read since suggests these creatures often travel in small family groups. If I'd known that then, I might have panicked and run, and who knows what would have happened. I didn't tell anyone about what I saw for months. Who would believe me? But I couldn't go back to those woods, not alone. Something fundamental had changed about my relationship with the forest. For the first time in my life, I felt like an intruder there. Fast forward 5 years. I'd moved out west to eastern Arizona after my mom passed and left me her cabin. The change of scenery helped me put the Kentucky incident behind me, though I never forgot it. The mountains and deserts of the Southwest are beautiful in their own way, different from the dense forests I grew up in. I'd also changed one habit. I never went into remote areas without a firearm anymore. Usually just carried my Glock 9mm in a hip holster. Most people out here do the same, so it wasn't unusual. Last summer, my girlfriend and I took a little vacation to the mountains near Alamogordo, New Mexico. We rented a cabin for a week, planning to hike and enjoy the cooler mountain air. The area was gorgeous. Pine forests, rocky outcroppings, stunning views of the valley below. On our third day there, I decided to take a morning walk while Sarah slept in. There was a power line clearing that cut through the forest near our cabin, creating a straight path up the mountainside. It was wide open, maybe 30 feet across, with the forest rising on either side. I headed up the clearing around 7 in the morning. The sun was just starting to hit the tops of the trees, and the air was cool and pleasant. I was enjoying the quiet morning, listening to the birds and watching for deer or turkey that might cross the clearing. I'd walked maybe half a mile when that feeling returned, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. It hit me so suddenly that I stopped mid-stride. My heart rate instantly doubled as the memory of Kentucky flooded back. I scanned the trees on both sides of the clearing, looking for any sign of movement. Nothing on the right. Then I turned to my left, toward the mountain ridge. There, moving parallel to me along the tree line, was a mountain lion. Not a small one either, a full-sized adult, tawny coat gleaming in the morning light. It was walking with that fluid, deliberate gait that big cats have, its eyes fixed directly on me. Unlike the Sasquatch, which had been stationary and partially hidden, this predator was in full view and clearly stalking me. I could see the muscles rippling under its coat as it moved, its tail swishing slightly. The distance between us was about 40 yards, close enough that it could close the gap in seconds if it decided to charge. I immediately reached for my pistol, drawing it and holding it at my side. "Hey!" I shouted as loud as I could. "Get out of here!" The cat stopped walking but didn't retreat. It just stared at me, unblinking, its tail moving in slow, deliberate sweeps. I started backing away down the clearing toward my cabin, never taking my eyes off the predator. "Go on! Get!" I kept yelling, trying to sound aggressive rather than afraid. The mountain lion began moving again, matching my pace exactly. When I stopped, it stopped. When I moved, it moved. It was maintaining the exact same distance between us, not rushing, just patiently following. I realized with growing horror that I was being escorted out of its territory, or worse, being herded. The cabin was still a good ways off, about 200 yards down the clearing and through a small patch of trees. I'd have to walk backward the entire way with this predator watching my every move. Every instinct was screaming at me to turn and run, but I knew better. Running would trigger the chase response. So I kept backing up, one slow step at a time. My pistol ready, my voice growing hoarse from constantly yelling at the cat. The sun was fully up now, beating down on the clearing. Sweat was pouring down my face, stinging my eyes, but I didn't dare wipe it away or take my attention off the mountain lion for even a second. Time stretched out in the most excruciating way. Each step backward felt like it took minutes. My calves were burning from the awkward movement. The cat maintained its position with eerie precision, never getting closer, but never retreating either. After what felt like hours, but was probably 15 minutes, I reached the edge of the clearing where the path narrowed through the trees leading to the cabin. This was the most dangerous part. I'd have less visibility, less room to maneuver. "Sarah!" I shouted toward the cabin, hoping my girlfriend might hear me and come out. No response. As I entered the narrow path, the mountain lion finally stopped at the edge of the clearing. It sat down on its haunches, still watching me. I kept backing away until I couldn't see it anymore, then turned and half ran, half stumbled the rest of the way to the cabin. I burst through the door, slamming it behind me and locking it with shaking hands. Sarah was in the kitchen making coffee, startled by my sudden entrance. "What happened?" she asked, alarmed at my appearance, sweaty, pale, gun in hand. I told her everything. We stayed in the cabin for the rest of the day, and I kept the pistol close. We saw no sign of the mountain lion after that, but we cut our vacation short and left the next morning. The thing that connects these two experiences, separated by years and thousands of miles, wasn't just the danger. It was the feeling of being sized up, evaluated by a predator's calculating intelligence. With the Sasquatch, there was curiosity mixed with that assessment. With the mountain lion, it was pure predatory intent. I still go into the wilderness, still hunt and fish and hike. But I'm different now, more aware of how fragile the line is between being the observer and being the observed, more conscious that we're not always at the top of the food chain. Sometimes at night, I still see those eyes watching me from behind the tree, still feel the weight of that stare. And I wonder what would have happened if I'd made different choices in those moments. If I'd run, if I'd approached, if I'd shot. Some questions are better left unanswered. Some watchers are better left unwatched. Story 2. I still wake up in cold sweats sometimes. It's been 15 years since that night at Oak Hollow Creek, but I can recall every detail like it happened yesterday. The sound, man. That sound. It's burned into my brain and I don't think I'll ever forget it. Me and Jake had been best friends since 3rd grade. We'd grown up in the same small town just outside of Oak Hollow, and we'd spent most of our teenage summers exploring the swampy woodlands that surrounded our community. We weren't exactly outdoorsmen or anything, just bored kids looking for adventure in a place where the most exciting thing was the annual Fall Festival. That summer we were 16 and we'd decided to camp out near Bear Creek. I remember my mom being hesitant about it. There had been some stories about strange animal sightings in the area, but nothing confirmed. Just typical small-town rumors. She eventually gave in after my dad convinced her it would be good for us to toughen up a bit. We hiked about 4 miles into the woods that afternoon. It was late June, hot and humid as hell. The mosquitoes were relentless, but we'd come prepared with bug spray and those citronella candles. We found this perfect spot between 2 massive oak trees on a small rise. One of the few dry patches in that whole swampy area. The location was ideal, elevated enough to keep our tent dry if it rained, with Bear Creek running about 20 yards to the west of us. We set up our tent, gathered firewood, and by nightfall had a decent little campsite going. Looking back, I realize how stupid we were. We had my dad's old shotgun, a Remington 870 pump that I'd brought just in case, though I'd only fired it a handful of times at the range with my dad. We didn't have cell reception out there. This was back in 2008, before smartphones were everywhere, and we'd only told our parents the general area where we'd be camping. The night started out normal enough. We grilled some hot dogs over the fire, talked about girls from school, typical teenage stuff. By midnight, Jake was telling ghost stories, ones we'd heard a million times but still got a kick out of. The fire was burning low, casting these weird shadows on the trees around us. The woods were alive with normal night sounds, crickets, frogs from the creek, the occasional hoot of an owl. And then everything went quiet. It was so sudden that at first I didn't even notice, but Jake stopped mid-sentence and looked at me. "You hear that?" he whispered. "Hear what?" "Exactly. Nothing." He was right. Every natural sound in the forest had just stopped. No crickets, no frogs, nothing. Just the soft crackling of our dying fire. That's when I felt it. This pressure in the air, like right before a thunderstorm hits. Except there wasn't a cloud in the sky. The stars were out in full force, and a half moon provided just enough light to see the outlines of the trees surrounding our little clearing. Then I heard it. Footsteps, coming from the south, from deeper in the woods. Deliberate footsteps, like something heavy moving slowly through the underbrush. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just a deer, or maybe even a black bear. They were common enough in the area. "Probably just a deer," I said, but my voice came out higher than normal. Jake didn't answer. He was staring into the darkness, his face pale in the firelight. The footsteps continued, getting closer. Whatever it wasn't trying to be quiet. It was moving steadily toward our camp. I reached for the shotgun that was leaning against my camping chair and pulled it onto my lap, not loading it yet, but wanting it close. "Lynn, what the hell is that?" Jake whispered, his voice tight with fear. I shook my head. "I don't know." The footsteps stopped about 30 yards from our camp. We couldn't see anything beyond the circle of light cast by our fire, but I could feel something watching us. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt this primal fear bubbling up inside me. Then it happened. The sound that thing made, I've never heard anything like it before or since. It started as this low growl, almost like a large dog, but then it transformed into something else entirely. It rose in pitch until it became a scream, but not a human scream. It was wild and feral, but with an intelligence behind it that made my blood freeze. It was part howl, part scream, and part something I can't even describe. It echoed through the trees, bouncing off the creek water and surrounding us, and then the thrashing started. Whatever this thing was, it began attacking a tree about 30 yards from our campsite. We could hear wood splintering, branches snapping. The sound of raw power and fury was unmistakable. This wasn't an animal marking its territory or a bear scratching itself. This was deliberate destruction, fueled by rage. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely load the shotgun. I fumbled with the shells, dropping one before finally getting 2 loaded. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "What the fuck is that?" I hissed, raising the shotgun but not pointing it anywhere specific because I still couldn't see what was making those sounds. And then Jake did something I still can't believe to this day. He stood up. "Jake, what the fuck are you doing?" I whispered frantically, trying to grab his arm to pull him back down. He shook me off. "I want to see what it is," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Maybe it's just trying to scare us off." "Well, it's fucking working," I replied, but Jake was already moving toward the edge of our firelight. The creature, whatever it was, continued its assault on the tree. The sound of splintering wood mixed with those awful vocalizations. It sounded like it was tearing the tree apart with its bare hands, or claws, or whatever it had. Jake stopped at the edge of the light, just barely visible to me now. I raised the shotgun, pointing it in the general direction of the sounds, though I couldn't see anything to aim at. "Hello?" Jake called out, his voice echoing slightly. "We don't mean any harm. We're just camping." I wanted to scream at him to shut up and get back to the fire, but I was too terrified to make a sound. The creature went quiet for a moment. The thrashing stopped. Then it let out another one of those screams, louder this time, and it seemed to be moving. I couldn't tell if it was coming closer or circling around. "Jake, get back here now," I finally managed to say. Surprisingly, he listened. He backed up slowly until he was beside me again, his eyes never leaving the darkness where the sounds were coming from. For the next 5 or 6 minutes, though it felt like hours, the creature continued its display, screaming, thrashing, breaking things. It never showed itself, never stepped into the light where we could see it. It just stayed in the darkness, letting us know it was there and that it was powerful. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went silent. Not the gradual return of forest sounds, not the sound of something large retreating through the underbrush. Just nothing, like someone had hit a mute button on the whole forest. We sat there frozen for what must have been 20 minutes. I kept the shotgun ready, my eyes straining to see anything moving in the darkness. Jake had grabbed a large stick and was holding it like a baseball bat. Though what good he thought that would do against whatever was out there, I don't know. Eventually, the normal forest sounds began to return. First a few crickets, then the frogs down by the creek. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance. "What the hell was that?" Jake finally whispered. I shook my head. "I don't know. I've never heard anything make a sound like that." "It sounded almost like a monkey," Jake said. "Like a really big, really pissed-off monkey. That's where the name came from, the monkey beast. It stuck with us after that night, our private code word for whatever the hell had terrorized us. We didn't sleep at all that night. We kept the fire going as high as we could, taking turns watching while the other one rested, though I don't think either of us actually closed our eyes. As soon as the first hint of dawn broke through the trees, we packed up our stuff and got the hell out of there. On the hike back, we searched for any signs of what had been there. Broken trees, footprints, anything. We found a tree that had been damaged. Bark stripped off in long sections, branches broken, but no tracks clear enough to identify. The ground was too soft and mossy to hold distinct prints. When we got back to town, we didn't tell anyone exactly what happened. Who would believe us? We just said we got spooked by some animal sounds and decided to come home early. But here's the thing that still haunts me. Over the next 4 years, before I left for college, Jake and I went back to that same spot 8 or 9 times. Sometimes together, sometimes with one other person. And on at least half of those trips, when there were only 1 or 2 of us, the same thing happened. The same sounds, the same tree thrashing, always just out of sight in the darkness. But whenever we brought more people, like when we took a group of 5 friends out there the summer after graduation, nothing happened. Not a sound, not a broken branch, nothing. It's like it knew, like it was intelligent, enough to assess the threat level and decide when to make itself known. I've spent countless hours researching what it could have been. Black bears don't behave that way. Neither do cougars or wolves. Some have suggested it might have been a Sasquatch, but I've never bought into that stuff. All I know is that something was out there that night. Something that doesn't fit neatly into the categories of animals I know exist. I'm 31 now. I live in the city, hours away from Oak Hollow Creek. I've got a normal job, a fiancé, a dog, all the trappings of a regular life. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I hear that sound again in my head. That unnatural, rage-filled howl that doesn't belong to any creature I can name. Jake and I still talk about it sometimes. He's the only one who understands, who was there. We've never found an explanation that makes sense. We've never told the full story to anyone else until now. Whatever was out there that night, watching us from the darkness, destroying that tree with what seemed like superhuman strength, it's still out there. I'm sure of it. And sometimes, in my nightmares, I see it finally stepping into the light, and I wake up before I can make out what it is, my sheets soaked with sweat, my heart pounding in my chest, just like it did that night 15 years ago at Oak Hollow Creek. Story 3. I still can't explain what I saw last September, and it's been eating at me for months now. I've spent most of my life in the woods around northern Pennsylvania, but nothing in my experience prepared me for what happened that day. It was September 16th, 2017, a date that's burned into my memory now. I'd set up some trail cameras earlier in the season in the eastern section of the Allegheny National Forest, about 15 miles from Kane, where I live. I do wildlife photography as a hobby, mostly white-tailed deer and black bears, nothing fancy. I've been tracking the same deer populations for about 8 years now, so I know those woods pretty well. That Wednesday morning was perfectly normal, cool but not cold, maybe 55 degrees, overcast but no rain. My son Jake had come along for the ride, but he stayed at our usual spot at the bottom of Murphy Creek Road while I drove up to check the cameras. He wanted to fish in the creek while I did the boring part, as he calls it. I remember being grateful it was a weekday, because those service roads get crowded on weekends with ATVs and other people. The silence was nice, just the sound of gravel crunching under my tires and the occasional bird call. I had the windows down in my F-150, enjoying that earthy smell you only get in the woods in early fall. I was about 3 miles up Murphy Creek Road, driving slow, maybe 15 mph, when I passed one of those little gravel offshoots that leads to private hunting land. I think it's the miller's property, though I've never met them. Just as I passed it, something caught my eye to the right, movement down that side path. At first, I thought it was just someone walking. Makes sense, right? Probably checking their own trail cams or scouting for the upcoming deer season. But something made me slow down and look again. What I saw still doesn't make sense to me. There was a figure walking right down the middle of that gravel path, maybe 40 yards away from the intersection where I was. But it wasn't right. It was completely black. And I don't mean like someone wearing black clothes. I mean black, like a silhouette cut out of reality. No variation in color or texture from head to foot. No clothing details I could make out, no shoe outlines, no pant legs or shirt sleeves, no hat or hood outline. Just a uniform black shape. The proportions were close to human, but not quite. It was tall. I'd guess around 6 foot, maybe a bit more. But the arms hung lower than they should have, almost to where the knees would be. And those arms didn't swing like human arms do when walking. They just hung there with only the slightest movement. The way it walked was what really got to me. The stride was too long, too fluid. Human walking has this predictable rhythm to it, right? This thing moved like each step was part of one continuous motion, legs spreading wider than any normal human gait. There was something almost elegant about it, which made it even more disturbing. I'm not religious, but the first thought that popped into my head was, that's not of God. Sounds dramatic, I know, but that's exactly what I thought in that moment. I drove past the intersection before I fully processed what I was seeing. I remember my hands getting clammy on the steering wheel. I stopped the truck about 30 feet past the turn and backed up, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. By the time I got back to where I could see down that path again, maybe 10 seconds later, there was nothing there. The figure was gone. Not walking away in the distance, not visible at all, just gone. I sat there for a minute, engine idling, trying to make sense of it. The rational part of my brain kicked in, suggesting maybe it was just someone in dark clothing who stepped into the woods. But the way it moved, and how quickly it vanished. I've been hunting these woods for 22 years, and I know how long it takes to get off a gravel road and into thick brush. It's not something you do in seconds, not without making noise. And speaking of noise, there wasn't any. No twigs snapping, no leaves rustling. The woods were dead quiet. I remember checking my watch, 10:22 a.m., broad daylight. I wasn't tired, wasn't drinking, wasn't on medication. I had my coffee that morning like always, nothing else. I put the truck in park and just sat there for a minute, trying to calm down. My heart was racing like I'd run a mile. Then I got this feeling, this prickly, uncomfortable feeling like I was being watched. The hair on my arms stood up. I've been in the woods enough to know when something's off. Against my better judgment, I got out of the truck. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked to the intersection and looked down that side path. Nothing moved, no sign of anything. I walked about 20 feet down that path, scanning the woods on both sides. The brush was thick, mountain laurel and young beech trees, but not impossible to move through. I looked for broken branches, disturbed leaves, anything that would indicate someone had just rushed off the path. Nothing. The ground was dry, packed gravel, not great for leaving prints. I didn't see any marks that looked fresh or unusual. Just the occasional deer track and what looked like raccoon prints from maybe the night before. What really bothers me, though, is what I remembered as I stood there. Earlier that same morning, Jake and I had spotted a deer about a mile back down the main road that didn't look right. It was a young doe, moving slowly across the road as we approached. When our headlights hit it, it barely reacted. Just this slow, stumbling walk. Its coat looked dull, patchy in places. At the time, I thought maybe it had chronic wasting disease or had been injured. We slowed down and watched it disappear into the brush. Standing there on that side path, I suddenly felt like there was a connection between that sick deer and whatever I'd just seen. I can't explain why, just a gut feeling that made my skin crawl. I got back in my truck pretty quickly after that. I still had 3 trail cameras to check, and I debated just turning around and heading back to get Jake. But that felt like overreacting, and I didn't want to scare him with something I couldn't even explain. So I kept going up the road, but I was on edge the whole time. I found myself constantly checking my mirrors and scanning the woods as I drove. My hands were shaking slightly as I swapped out the memory cards in my cameras. I worked faster than usual, not wanting to be out of the truck for long. The cameras were about a half-mile apart, set up near game trails and a natural salt lick I'd found years ago. Nothing seemed disturbed, no cameras moved or damaged, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At the last camera, I heard something moving in the brush about 50 yards away. Normally, I'd assume deer or maybe a bear and try to get a look. That day, I practically jumped back into my truck and locked the doors. Probably just an animal, but I wasn't taking chances. I drove back down Murphy Creek Road faster than I should have on gravel. When I passed that turnoff again, I slowed down just enough to look. Still nothing there, just an empty path disappearing into the trees. When I got back to where Jake was fishing, I must have looked as shaken as I felt because he immediately asked what was wrong. I downplayed it. Told him I thought I'd seen a bear, but it ran off. No point in freaking him out, especially since I couldn't even explain what I'd seen. That night, after Jake went to bed, I went through the trail cam footage on my laptop. Part of me was dreading seeing that black figure show up in one of the frames, but there was nothing unusual, just the regular deer, a few raccoons, one decent-sized black bear from 3 days earlier. Nothing that shouldn't be there. I've been back to those woods many times since then, never seen anything like it again. But I don't go alone anymore, and I don't check those cameras unless it's broad daylight with someone waiting in the truck. I've tried researching what it could have been, looked into local legends, cryptids, everything. Nothing matches exactly what I saw. Some Bigfoot accounts describe a similar fluid movement, but this wasn't hairy or bulky like those descriptions. It was lean, almost elegant in a disturbing way. The closest thing I've found is something called a shadow person, but those are supposedly seen indoors, often when people are half asleep. This was 10:22 a.m. in the woods, and I was wide awake. I've only told 2 people about this, my brother and my closest hunting buddy. My brother thinks I saw a person in weird clothes who ducked into the woods. My buddy has no explanation, but admitted the area has always given him an uneasy feeling, especially that section near the Miller property. It's been 8 months, and I still think about it several times a week. When I'm in the woods now, I'm constantly looking over my shoulder. That feeling of being watched comes back sometimes, even when I'm nowhere near Murphy Creek Road. The thing that haunts me most is wondering if I stumbled into something's hunting territory that day. Was that sickly deer its prey? Was I? I still don't have answers. Maybe I never will. But I know what I saw wasn't a bear, wasn't a person in a costume, wasn't a shadow or trick of light. It was something else. Something that doesn't belong in those woods. Or maybe something that belongs there more than we do. Story 4. I've kept this story to myself for so long now, 3 decades, and I've barely told a soul. But after seeing others share similar experiences, I think I'm finally ready to get this off my chest. I still don't know what I encountered that day, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to know. It was late November 1992. I was 23 years old then, fresh out of college and working my first real job. Deer season in Utah. Hunting was a family tradition, something my grandfather started with my dad, who then passed it to me. We'd been doing these trips since I was old enough to legally handle a rifle. My grandfather, father, Uncle Dale and I drove up to the mountains near Logan, Utah before sunrise. The air was crisp that morning, the kind of cold that bites at your fingertips and makes your breath visible in little clouds. We'd gotten up at 3 in the morning, loaded the truck with our gear while it was still pitch black. I remember my dad complaining about his thermos leaking coffee all over the back seat. Small details like that stick with you, even when everything else from that day seems like some kind of fever dream. We reached our spot just as daylight was breaking over the mountains. It was a good area we'd hunted before, lots of oak brush mixed with stands of pine and aspen, perfect for deer to bed down. After parking the truck on an old logging road, we decided to split up to cover more ground. My grandfather headed west along a ridge, my dad took the southern draw, Uncle Dale went east, and I headed north into a section with rows of pine trees. I was wearing my usual hunting gear, Carhartt coveralls, thick gloves, sturdy boots, orange vest. My rifle was a Remington 30-06 my dad had given me when I turned 18. I had 2 energy bars in my pocket, a compass, and a small canteen of water. Nothing special or different from any other hunting trip. Everything felt normal. I walked about 150 yards into the woods, following these neat rows of pines that had clearly been planted rather than naturally grown. The forest floor was covered with a layer of fallen pine needles that muffled my footsteps. Every so often I'd stop, scan the area, and listen. That's what hunting is mostly, listening and waiting. The mountain was quiet that morning. No wind, no birds. Just the occasional distant crack of a branch from the weight of early snow, or maybe a small animal. The silence should have been my first warning. I'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when I heard it. A loud crashing sound to my left, like something big moving through the underbrush. My first thought was buck, a big one too from the sound of it. I instantly froze, the way you're supposed to when you think you've spooked a deer. I stood absolutely still, barely breathing, my finger resting lightly near the trigger guard of my rifle. The crashing stopped when I stopped. That's when I first felt something was off. Deer don't typically stop when you stop, not if they know you're there, they run. But this stopped, like it was listening, like it was aware. I decided to test something. I deliberately took a few steps forward, moving slowly and deliberately. The crashing sound started again, but it wasn't moving away from me. It was moving parallel, maybe even slightly toward me. My heart rate picked up a bit. I told myself it was probably just a deer circling around to get my scent. That happens sometimes, but deep down, I knew deer don't behave that way. They don't track hunters. I moved to the next row of trees, crouching low so I could see under the branches. The rows were about 15 feet apart, creating these long corridors through the forest. I figured if it was a deer, I'd catch sight of it crossing between rows. That's when the smell hit me. God, that smell. It's hard to describe adequately, like rotting meat mixed with wet dog fur that had been left in the sun for days. Musky, powerful, the kind of stench that makes your stomach turn. It was coming from the direction of the noise. I heard another crack of branches, loud, like they were being snapped rather than just stepped on. And then I saw it. A leg. Just one enormous leg stepped into the row of trees about 25 yards away from me. It was covered in thick white fur, but not like a polar bear's. This was dirtier, matted in places. The leg was massive, probably the circumference of my waist, and what I could see of it was at least 4 feet tall. Just the lower portion. I couldn't see the upper thigh or the body it was attached to because of the tree branches. I completely froze. Not the practiced stillness of a hunter, but the absolute paralysis of pure, primal fear. My mouth went dry. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard, I was certain whatever this thing was could hear it. For a split second, I thought about raising my rifle. The thought vanished as quickly as it came. Whatever this creature was, my .30-06 suddenly felt like a toy in my hands. It would be like trying to take down a tank with a BB gun. Besides, my arms wouldn't respond anyway. I was locked in place, watching this thing that shouldn't exist. The leg didn't move for what seemed like forever. I could hear deep, heavy breathing from behind the trees. Not panting like a dog, but slow, deliberate breaths that reminded me of the sound a bull makes before it charges. Each exhale sent another wave of that putrid smell washing over me. For approximately 10 minutes, we stayed like that. Me, frozen in terror, and this thing standing just yards away, seemingly aware of my presence but not making any move toward me. I kept thinking it would come crashing through the trees at any moment. I kept imagining what the rest of it must look like. How tall was it? 8 feet? 10? More? Eventually, after what felt like hours but was probably just a few more minutes, the leg withdrew. I heard movement again, branches breaking, but the sound was moving away now. Slowly at first, then faster. Whatever it was leaving. I didn't move. Not for a long time. I was afraid it was a trick, that it was circling around behind me. My legs were cramping from staying in the same crouched position, but I didn't dare straighten up. I just waited, listening as the sounds grew more distant until I couldn't hear them anymore. When I finally couldn't detect any sign of the creature, I stood up. My legs were shaking so badly I nearly fell over. I didn't walk, I ran. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life, not caring about the noise I was making, not stopping to look back. I just needed to get back to the truck, back to safety, back to anything normal and human. I reached the car and collapsed against it, gulping air, my rifle clutched uselessly in my trembling hands. I sat there for nearly 2 hours, jumping at every sound from the forest, until finally my dad, grandfather, and uncle returned one by one. They asked why I was back so early, why I looked so pale. I couldn't tell them. I mumbled something about not feeling well, maybe coming down with something. My grandfather felt my forehead, concerned I had a fever. My dad offered me some water from his canteen. Uncle Dale joked that I'd seen the ghost of a hunter who died in these mountains years ago. If only it had been a ghost. The drive home was a blur. They talked about the tracks they'd seen, the buck my uncle almost got a shot at. I stared out the window at the passing trees, scanning for white fur, for any movement that didn't belong. For years after, I made excuses to avoid our annual hunting trips. When I did go, I never ventured far from the others. I never told them why. How could I? What would I say? I saw something impossible. I think I encountered a monster in the woods. They'd think I was crazy or that I was making up stories. I've spent countless nights researching, trying to find an explanation. Bears don't match what I saw. Wrong color, wrong gait, wrong smell. No moose or elk has legs like that. I've read about supposed Bigfoot sightings, but even those descriptions don't quite match. Whatever I saw was bigger, whiter. Sometimes I try to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, a momentary hallucination brought on by the solitude of the mountains. But then I remember that smell. You don't hallucinate a smell that potent, that distinctive, and you don't imagine the primal fear that kept me frozen in place. It's been 30 years now. I've never gone hunting alone since that day. I still live in Utah, but I stay away from those mountains near Logan. Sometimes when I'm driving on the highway and I look up at those distant peaks, I wonder if it's still up there, moving between the trees, watching hikers and hunters who have no idea what shares the forest with them. I don't know what I saw that day in November 1992. I don't know if there's a name for it, or if anyone would believe me if I described it in full. All I know is that there are things in this world that defy explanation, things that shouldn't exist, but do. And sometimes, if you're unlucky enough, you catch a glimpse of them. Just a glimpse, a leg, a sound, a smell, and it changes everything you thought you knew about the world around you. Story 5. I've been sitting on this for over a month now, just trying to make sense of it. I don't usually post stuff online, but I need to tell someone who might believe me because my wife thinks I need to see a therapist, and maybe she's right. But I know what I saw, and it wasn't something any amount of therapy is going to explain away. I've been delivering newspapers in rural South Carolina for almost 11 years now. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills, and I like the quiet mornings to myself. My route covers about 60 miles of backcountry roads outside Darlington. Most mornings are exactly the same. I pick up my papers at 4 a.m., load them in my Ford Explorer, and spend the next 3 hours tossing them onto driveways and into mailboxes. I've got it down to a science. 3 Tuesdays ago, I was on the last leg of my route. It was around 6:45 in the morning, still pretty dark because it was cloudy, though the sun was starting to come up. I was on Old Creek Road, a long stretch that runs between the Marshall cornfields and a dense patch of woods. I've driven this road thousands of times, and I know every pothole and bend. I had about 15 more deliveries to make when my headlights swept across something at the edge of the cornfield where it meets the woods. At first, I thought it was just Mr. Marshall out checking his crops. He's an early riser, and I've seen him out at all hours. But something didn't feel right about the silhouette. For one thing, it was entirely black. Not like someone wearing dark clothes, but like a hole in the world that was shaped like a person. I slowed down to about 15 miles per hour, squinting through my windshield. The figure was walking along the tree line, not on the road, moving in the same direction I was driving. Its movements were wrong. I don't know how else to describe it, like watching someone try to walk underwater, but faster, jerky and fluid at the same time. My stomach knotted up instantly. Then it turned toward my vehicle. I'll never forget what I saw. 2 large, glowing red eyes reflected in my headlights. Not like animal eyes that catch the light. These were actually glowing, like hot coals. They were too big, too round, and set too far apart on what I assumed was its face. I don't know what possessed me, but I actually pulled my vehicle closer to get a better look. Maybe it was disbelief. maybe it was morbid curiosity. The gravel crunched under my tires as I steered toward the shoulder of the road. The thing stopped dead and turned its head, just its head, toward me again. I was maybe 75 yards away, close enough to make out its size, but not much detail. It was huge, between 6 and 7 feet tall, way bigger than any person around here. I couldn't make out any clothes or features. It was just this black silhouette with those burning red eyes. For a few seconds, it just stood there watching me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My hands were frozen to the steering wheel, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. Then, with the same unnatural movement, it turned away and continued walking along the tree line, moving steadily away from the road. That's when the fear hit me, this crushing wave of dread that made me feel like I was going to throw up or pass out. I stomped on the gas pedal and got the hell out of there, my tires spinning on the gravel before catching. I must have been going 60 down that narrow country road, throwing papers out my window without even slowing down. I kept checking my rearview mirror, terrified I'd see those red eyes getting closer, but there was nothing, just darkness and the fading outline of the road behind me. I finished my route in record time, my hands shaking so bad I could barely grip the wheel. When I got home, my wife was still asleep. I sat in the kitchen with all the lights on, drinking coffee and trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I've lived in rural areas my whole life. I hike on weekends, and I've encountered all kinds of wildlife, deer, coyotes, even black bears. I know what animals look like in my headlights. Hell, I've been driving this same route for over a decade, and I can identify a possum from 50 yards away in the dark. This wasn't an animal. The proportions were all wrong. Too human in some ways, too inhuman in others. And those eyes. Animals' eyes don't glow like that. They reflect light, but they don't burn from within. I thought maybe it was someone playing a prank, but at 6:45 in the morning, in the middle of nowhere, and nobody around here is that tall. Plus, there was something about the way it moved that no human could mimic. I've tried to rationalize it every way I can. Sleep deprivation. I've worked this schedule for years without hallucinating. Tricks of the light? The image is too clear in my mind. Some kind of rare animal? Nothing explains those eyes or that height. The whole encounter lasted maybe 20 to 25 seconds, but it's burned into my brain like a brand. I can't close my eyes without seeing that silhouette, those glowing red orbs staring through me. I didn't tell my wife at first. She already worries about me driving those dark roads alone every morning, but after 3 nights of waking up in cold sweats, she knew something was wrong. When I finally told her, I could see she didn't believe me. She suggested I was working too hard, that maybe I nodded off at the wheel and dreamed it. I wish that were true. I really do. The next day, I changed my route, slightly, so I wouldn't have to pass that exact spot. I told my supervisor I was having trouble with a dog on that stretch of road. It added about 15 minutes to my drive, but I didn't care. But avoiding the spot didn't help with the nightmares. In them, I'm always driving down Old Creek Road, but I can't control the car. It keeps slowing down no matter how hard I press the gas. Then I see the figure, but in the dreams, it starts walking toward me. I wake up right before it reaches my window. After a week, I decided I needed to go back in daylight. I don't know what I expected to find. Footprints maybe, or some sign that would explain what I'd seen. On Saturday, I drove out there around noon. The cornfield looked normal, swaying slightly in the breeze. The woods were just woods. I parked where I thought I'd seen the figure and got out, feeling like an idiot but needing to do something. The ground at the edge of the field was soft from recent rain. I walked along the tree line, looking for tracks or broken corn stalks, anything unusual. About 100 yards in, I found something that made my blood run cold. There was a patch where the corn stalks were all bent and broken, like something heavy had moved through them. But the weird part was the pattern. They weren't broken in a straight line like a person or animal would make walking through. They were bent in this perfect circle, about 8 feet in diameter, and in the center the ground was scorched black, like someone had built a fire there, except there was no ash, just this perfect circle of blackened earth. I took a picture with my phone, though my hands were shaking so bad it came out blurry. When I got home and looked at it, the image didn't capture how wrong it felt to stand there, how the air seemed heavier inside that circle, how the birds went quiet when I approached it. I've gone back to my normal route now. I tell myself it's because the detour was adding too much time to my mornings, but the truth is I need to know if it's still there. Every morning when I approach that stretch of Old Creek Road, my heart races and my palms sweat. I slow down and scan the tree line, both dreading and hoping to see those red eyes again. So far, there's been nothing. But sometimes, when I drive past the spot where I found that circle, I swear I can feel something watching me from the woods. And lately, I've been noticing strange things. Dead animals on the side of the road with no visible injuries, electrical problems with my car near that spot, my radio picking up weird static that sounds almost like words. The encounter only lasted seconds, but it's changed everything. I can't explain what I saw that morning near Darlington. I've lived here my whole life, and I know it wasn't anything natural. It was something dark, something that doesn't belong in our world. I still deliver papers every morning because I need the job, but every day I drive that route with a knot in my stomach and one eye on the tree line, because whatever that thing was, I don't think it was just passing through. And the worst part? Last night I woke up around 3 in the morning, and through our bedroom window, just for a split second, I thought I saw 2 red dots of light hovering at the edge of our property, right where our yard meets the woods. I haven't told my wife. I don't know what to do. I don't even know why I'm writing this, except that I need someone to believe me, because I think it's found me, and I don't know what happens next. Story 6. I never believed in monsters or cryptids before New Year's Day, 1980. I'm not the type to buy into tabloid stories or conspiracy theories. I'm a practical man. I hunt, I fish, I work with my hands. I fix things that are broken, and I believe what I can see and touch. But what my wife Linda and I saw that morning in the wetlands outside Bangor changed everything for me. It was the first day of the new decade. We'd had a small celebration at home the night before, nothing crazy. I remember Linda wanted to stay up until midnight, but I had other plans. I'd wounded a buck the previous evening, not a clean shot, and I hated the thought of leaving an animal suffering. I told her we needed to get up early to track it down. She wasn't thrilled about trekking through the snow on New Year's morning, but she understood. That's the kind of woman Linda is. We woke up when it was still dark, around 5:30. The temperature had dropped overnight, hovering around 15 degrees. I remember the kitchen window was completely frosted over as we sipped our coffee. Linda made egg sandwiches for the road. I dressed in my usual hunting gear, thermal underwear, flannel shirt, my heavy canvas jacket, wool socks, and boots. I grabbed my rifle, more out of habit than anything else. If we found the deer alive but suffering, I'd need to finish what I'd started. We took my old Ford pickup and headed out while the world was still asleep. The roads were pretty empty. Everyone else was sleeping off their New Year's celebrations. We drove about 20 minutes outside town to a spot along the highway where there's a small pull-off near the wetlands. I'd been hunting there for years. It's quiet, secluded, and usually good for deer. The snow was deep that year, maybe 15 inches, with a fresh layer from the night before. It crunched under our boots as we got out of the truck. I remember checking my watch as we started walking. It was just after 6 in the morning, still dark, but with that grayish hint that tells you sunrise isn't far off. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. Every exhale created these thick clouds that hung in front of our faces. Linda stayed close behind me as we followed my tracks from the previous day. The wetlands are eerie in winter, all those bare trees sticking up through the snow, the frozen patches of water. Everything so still. We hiked about half a mile in, following the blood trail from the deer. It wasn't much blood, just small drops here and there on the snow. I was starting to worry we might not find it. The ground blind I'd set up was just ahead, a simple structure made of branches and canvas that I'd positioned at the edge of a small clearing. I figured we'd check there first, then fan out if needed. That's when it started snowing again. Just lightly at first, those tiny dry flakes that don't amount to much. The sky was getting lighter, that blue-gray color before the sun actually appears. Linda was complaining about her toes getting cold. I was about to suggest we take a break when I noticed movement up ahead, maybe 30 yards past my blind. My first thought was that it was the wounded deer. I raised my hand to signal Linda to stop and be quiet, but as I focused on the shape moving through the brush, I realized it was way too big to be a deer. And it wasn't moving like one either. It was walking upright. For a split second, I thought it might be old Bill Hadley. He's a local hunter who wears this ridiculous fur coat his grandfather owned. But as the figure moved into a slightly clearer area, I knew it wasn't Bill. It wasn't anyone I knew. It wasn't like any person I'd ever seen. This thing, and I don't know what else to call it, stood at least 7 or 8 feet tall. I'm 6 feet even, and this creature towered over what I'd estimate my height would be in that same spot. It was covered in dark, shaggy fur, not like a bear's fur, which is more uniform. This was longer in some places, especially around the shoulders. The color was dark brown, almost black in the dim light. It moved with purpose, taking long strides through the snow. What struck me most was how easily it moved despite the deep snow. Where Linda and I had been struggling, post-holing with every step, this thing seemed to glide over the surface, only sinking a few inches. I froze completely. My rifle was slung over my shoulder, but I never even thought about reaching for it. Linda grabbed my arm so hard, I found bruises later. Neither of us spoke. I don't think we even breathed. The creature was moving perpendicular to us, from right to left, and hadn't seemed to notice us yet. As it passed through a small gap in the trees, I got my clearest look. The head sat directly on those massive shoulders, no distinct neck that I could see. The arms hung long, reaching almost to the knees. And the face, I couldn't make out clear features from that distance in the dim light, but it wasn't human. The profile was more like a flattened snout. The most surreal moment came when it passed under a stand of young birch trees. The top of its head brushed against branches that I knew for a fact were well above my reach. I'd set up my blind near those trees before, and I'd needed to jump to touch those same branches. This thing just casually brushed them as it walked by. I don't know how long we stood there. It felt like hours, but was probably only a couple of minutes. The creature disappeared into thicker brush to our left. When it was gone, Linda finally whispered, "We need to leave." Her voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand her. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We turned around and started back toward the truck. We didn't run. Running seemed dangerous somehow, like it might attract attention, but we moved as fast as we could through that deep snow. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every few steps, I'd look back over my shoulder, terrified that thing would be following us. The half-mile back to the truck was the longest walk of my life. Every snapping twig made us jump. The snow seemed deeper, the brush thicker. My mind kept replaying what we'd seen, trying to make it into something normal and explainable. A bear walking on its hind legs? No bear gets that tall, and none move like that. Another hunter in some kind of ghillie suit? That didn't make sense either. No human is that large. When we finally reached the truck, Linda was crying, not sobbing, just silent tears running down her face. I wasn't much better off. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys in the snow and had to dig around to find them. Once inside, I cranked the heat and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what had happened. "What was that, Marcus?" Linda finally asked. I shook my head. I had no answer. We can't tell people, she said after another long silence. They'll think we're crazy. She was right, of course. Bangor isn't the kind of place where you go around talking about seeing monsters in the woods. I'm a respected member of the community. I work at the paper mill, coach Little League in the summer. People know me as level-headed, practical. Or they did. We did tell a few people. My brother, Linda's sister, my parents. They reacted exactly how we expected. My brother laughed and asked how much we'd had to drink the night before. My father suggested it was probably just another hunter. Linda's sister was a bit more sympathetic, but clearly didn't believe us either. About a week later, my Aunt Doris, who delivers mail in the rural areas outside Bangor, came by the house. She handed me a clipping from the local newspaper. The headline read, "Multiple witnesses report Bigfoot sightings near western wetlands." The article mentioned 3 separate sightings, all within a quarter mile of where we'd been that morning. One from a truck driver who'd pulled over to check his tires, another from a family returning from a New Year's party, and a third from a local farmer checking on his property. I felt sick reading it. Not because it scared me, though it did, but because it confirmed what we'd seen. Linda and I weren't crazy. We hadn't imagined it. Other people had seen the same thing. I went back to those wetlands dozens of times over the next few years, sometimes with Linda, sometimes alone. I told myself I was hunting, but really I was looking for it. I wanted to see it again, to prove to myself that it was real. I never did. I'm 65 now. Linda passed away 3 years ago from cancer. I've never told this story publicly before. For decades, it's just been this thing that happened to us, this secret we carried. When people talk about Bigfoot or Sasquatch, I stay quiet. I don't join in the ridicule, but I don't share my experience either. I still don't know what we saw that morning. Was it really what people call Bigfoot? Maybe. All I know for certain is that something impossibly large, covered in fur, walking on 2 legs like a man, but definitely not a man, crossed our path in the wetlands outside Bangor on the first morning of 1980. The older I get, the more I realize there are things in this world we don't understand. Things that exist in the spaces between what we know and what we fear. I've never seen anything like it since that day, and part of me hopes I never do again. But another part, the part that still wakes up sometimes in the middle of the night, remembering the way that creature moved through the snow. That part of me is still looking, still wondering what's out there in the woods when no one's around to see. Story 7. I still don't know how to explain what happened that day in July 2010. I've tried to forget it, tried to convince myself it was just some weird trick of the light or my imagination running wild. But my friend saw it too. That's the part that keeps me up at night sometimes. It was just a normal summer evening in South Dakota, the kind where the air is still warm but not sticky, and the sun hangs around forever. My buddy Jake and I were driving around the outskirts of Brookings, just killing time like we always did. Nothing special about that day. We'd finished our shifts at the hardware store around 5, grabbed some burgers, and were just cruising around the back roads outside town where we both lived. It was probably around 6 in the evening. The sky was completely clear. Visibility was perfect. We were in my old Chevy pickup, windows down, radio playing some forgettable country song. Just 2 20-something guys with nothing better to do. We were coming up this hill on County Road 14, a stretch I'd driven probably 1,000 times before. It's not far from my neighborhood, maybe 2 miles from my parents' place where I was still living at the time. As we crested the hill, that's when I first saw it. Something dark moved incredibly fast past one of the telephone poles on the right side of the road. My first thought was jogger, someone in dark clothes out for an evening run. But something felt off about the movement. It was too fluid, too quick. I remember slowing down a bit, trying to see where they went. "Did you see that person?" Jake asked, leaning forward in his seat to look out my side window. That's when my stomach first knotted up. Because if Jake saw it too, then I wasn't imagining things. Yeah, I said. Weird place to be jogging, though. We reached the intersection at the bottom of the hill, and both of us were looking around. There wasn't a person in sight, no jogger, no one walking along the road. Where'd they go? Jake asked, sounding genuinely confused. I pulled over to the shoulder and stopped the truck. I don't know. They must have gone into the woods. The woods there aren't exactly dense, just typical Midwestern mix of trees with some undergrowth. You can usually see pretty far through them, especially in the early evening light. Let's check it out, Jake said. Looking back, I wish we'd just driven away, just kept going and forgotten all about it. But we were young, curious, and honestly at that point, I was just thinking we'd spotted someone acting weird, maybe a trespasser or someone up to no good. Nothing that would change our lives. We got out of the truck and walked to the edge of the road. From there, we could see a slight slope leading up into the trees. Nothing moved at first. The only sound was the occasional car passing on the main road about a quarter-mile away. I don't see anybody, I said, already feeling silly for stopping. Jake shielded his eyes from the setting sun. Wait, there's something moving up there. At first, I didn't see what he was pointing at. Then I caught it. Movement behind a cluster of bushes and young saplings about 50 yards into the woods. Something large and dark was partially hidden, moving slowly behind the vegetation. "Hello?" Jake called out, not too loud. Nobody answered. We stood there, watching, and then it stepped out into a small clearing. And that's when everything I thought I knew about the world just collapsed. This wasn't a person. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. It stopped in the clearing and turned to look directly at us. I'll never forget that moment, the way it slowly rotated its entire body to face us. It was completely covered in black hair or fur, not dark brown like a bear, pure jet black, and tall. God, it was tall. I'm 6'1", and this thing had to be at least 7 feet, maybe more. Its torso was long, almost stretched looking, and its arms, Jesus, its arms hung down past its knees. Its posture was slightly hunched forward, making those arms look even more unnatural and wrong. I couldn't move, literally could not make my legs work. Jake was frozen beside me too. I could hear his breathing getting faster, matching mine. The thing just stared at us. I couldn't make out facial features clearly at that distance, but I knew it was looking right at us. I felt it, like being spotted by a predator. Then it did something that haunts me to this day. It bent slightly, deliberately scooped up a handful of dirt and forest debris from the ground and threw it forcefully in our direction. The dirt landed several feet short of us, but the message couldn't have been clearer. Stay away, this is a warning. The most terrifying part, it never made a sound. Not one grunt, growl or breath loud enough to hear. Just silent, deliberate movement. After throwing the dirt, it turned and was gone. Back into the woods with a speed that was impossible. I mean physically impossible for a human. It moved through dense underbrush and between trees like they weren't even there. 1 second it was in the clearing, the next it had covered 30 yards deeper into the forest. Nothing human moves like that. Nothing. I don't remember getting back in the truck. I just remember sitting behind the wheel, hands shaking so bad I couldn't get the key in the ignition. "What the fuck was that?" Jake kept saying over and over. "What the fuck was that, Dan?" I couldn't answer him. My mind was racing through possibilities. A bear. No, bears don't stand like that, don't have those proportions. A person in a costume. Who would be out in the woods in July in a full-body fur suit? And how could they move that fast through the underbrush? Every explanation I came up with fell apart as soon as I thought of it. The drive back to town was silent. Jake asked me to drop him off at his place, and I did. We didn't talk about what we'd seen. I think we were both trying to process it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those impossibly long arms, the way it moved, fluid but unnatural. The way it deliberately threw dirt at us. That wasn't an animal acting on instinct. That was a message. That was intelligence. The next morning, I went back. I know that sounds crazy, but I had to see if there was any evidence, any proof of what we'd seen. I parked in the same spot and walked into the woods, following what I thought was the same path. I found the clearing where it had stood. The ground was disturbed, but I couldn't make out any distinct footprints, just depressions in the soft earth and leaf litter. I searched for over an hour, looking for hair, tracks, anything. I found nothing conclusive, but the way some of the branches were broken high up, much higher than I could reach, made me believe even more strongly that something large had moved through there. As I was searching, I had this overwhelming feeling of being watched the whole time. Every hair on my neck was standing up. I didn't see anything, but I knew I wasn't alone in those woods. I left pretty quickly after that. The thing is, this wasn't even my first weird experience in these woods. Back in 1999, when I was in high school, I had another encounter near my house. I was walking our dog late one evening, and I saw something move between houses at the edge of our neighborhood, where the yards back up to the same stretch of woods. Just a glimpse of something large and dark, moving in a way that wasn't quite right. I convinced myself it was just a neighbor, or maybe a deer, but after what Jake and I saw, I'm pretty sure these woods are some kind of travel corridor for whatever these things are. I've researched online, and there are reports of similar creatures all over the country. Some people call them Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but those names seem almost silly compared to what we saw. This wasn't some fuzzy forest giant from a beef jerky commercial. This was something primal and intelligent that clearly didn't want us in its territory. Jake and I don't talk about it much anymore. We drifted apart after a few months, not because of any falling out, but I think being around each other was a constant reminder of what we saw. Something neither of us could explain or wanted to remember. I still live in the area, but I don't drive that road at dusk anymore. I don't go into those woods. Sometimes when I'm home alone at night and hear something outside, my mind goes right back to that clearing, to those long arms and that deliberate warning. The most disturbing part is that I believe these things have been here all along, moving around us, staying just out of sight. How many times have you glimpsed something in your peripheral vision and dismissed it? How many unexplained sounds in the woods have you rationalized away? I know what I saw that July evening in 2010. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a person in a costume, and it definitely wasn't a jogger. It was something that shouldn't exist in our understanding of the world, but it does. It's out there in those woods right now, probably watching, probably aware of the houses and roads encroaching on its territory. And sometimes, when I'm driving near those woods and catch a dark movement just at the edge of my vision, I don't look too closely anymore. Some things, once seen, can't be unseen, and some warnings should be heeded. Story 8. I've never really told anyone the full story of what happened to me back in 2009. I was 9 years old at the time, living with my parents in this small coastal town in Washington. Our house was at the edge of this big pine forest, the kind where the trees are so tall they block out most of the sunlight. That summer was actually pretty good. School was out, and I spent most days just being a kid, you know? Playing outside, riding my bike, the usual stuff. My parents both worked during the day, but they were pretty relaxed about letting me play in the yard by myself. We lived in a safe area, no real traffic, and our property was pretty big. About an acre with the forest making up our back border. This particular day in early August was perfect, warm but not hot, clear blue sky, that smell of pine sap and dry grass in the air. Mom had left for work around 8 that morning, and Dad had been gone since 6. I remember eating Cinnamon Toast Crunch for breakfast while watching cartoons, then heading outside around 10 with my soccer ball. I wasn't really into organized sports, but I liked kicking the ball around by myself, pretending I was scoring the winning goal in some imaginary championship game. I'd been outside for maybe an hour, just messing around in the yard. Our lawn sloped down a bit toward the trees, and I was running up and down, kicking the ball, chasing it. You know how kids play. The forest edge was about 50 yards from our back porch. I wasn't supposed to go into the trees alone. That was one of my parents' rules. But I could play near them. The tree line was pretty dense. Tall Douglas firs mixed with some cedar and a few other types I couldn't name. In some spots, you couldn't see more than a few feet into the woods because of how thick the undergrowth was. I remember taking a break, sitting on the grass and just catching my breath. It was so quiet out there. No cars, no other kids, just occasional bird sounds and the slight rustling of tree branches in the breeze. I took a drink from my water bottle and started kicking the ball again, letting it roll down toward the tree line and then chasing after it. That's when it happened. The ball rolled to a stop about 15 feet from the edge of the forest. I jogged down to get it, and as I bent to pick it up, something made me look up. I don't know if it was a sound or movement or just that weird feeling you get when someone's watching you. At first, I thought I was looking at part of a tree trunk. There are some pretty massive trees in those woods, and from a distance they can play tricks on your eyes. But this was different. As my eyes focused, I realized what I thought was a tree trunk was actually partially hidden behind a tree, and it was looking at me. I froze, completely froze. My hand was still reaching for the ball, but I couldn't move. I just stared, and it stared back. The creature, I don't know what else to call it, was huge. I could only see about half of it because it was standing behind this thick fir tree, but what I could see was covered in this dark brown, rough-looking hair. Not like soft, fluffy bear fur, but more like a horse's mane, coarse and kind of matted in places. The hair was longer in some spots, especially around what I assumed was its shoulders. The parts of its skin I could see, a patch on what seemed to be its face and a bit of its shoulder, were this dark grayish color, almost like elephant skin, but rougher looking. Its face was what really got to me. It was flat and wide, with this heavy brow ridge that hung over its eyes. And those eyes, they were dark, set deep in its face, and they were focused right on me. Its mouth was just a straight line, no expression at all. I'm not sure exactly how tall it was since it was partially hidden and standing a bit downhill from me. But it was big, way bigger than my dad, who was 6 feet tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet. And it was broad, thick, not fat, but solid. We just stared at each other. I don't know how long. It felt like forever, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. There was this heavy feeling in the air, like right before a thunderstorm, but different. It wasn't scary exactly, more like unnatural, like something wasn't right with the world in that moment. The weirdest part was the silence. There wasn't a single sound, no birds, no insects, nothing. Just me and this thing looking at each other across 20 feet of grass. Then, without making any noise, not a single twig snap or leaf rustle, it stepped backward behind the tree and was gone. Just like that. I didn't hear it move away through the forest or anything. It was just there, and then it wasn't. I didn't scream. I didn't run away immediately. I just slowly picked up my ball and backed away, keeping my eyes on the spot where it had been. I kept thinking it would come back out, or I'd see it moving between the trees, but there was nothing. When I got about halfway back to the house, I turned and walked normally, but kept glancing back over my shoulder. I went inside, locked the door behind me, and sat on the couch with the TV off. For what felt like hours. I remember my heart was racing, and my hands were shaking a little, but I wasn't panicking. The rest of that day is kind of a blur. I stayed inside watching TV, and when Mom got home around 4, I acted normal. I don't know why I didn't tell her or my dad when he got home later. Maybe I thought they wouldn't believe me, or they'd think I was making it up for attention. Maybe I was afraid they'd tell me it was just a bear. But I knew it wasn't a bear. I've seen bears. This wasn't that. Or maybe, and this is what I've thought more as I've gotten older, Maybe there was something about that encounter that felt private, like it wasn't meant to be shared, like I'd stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept thinking I could hear something moving around outside my window, but when I'd get up to look, there was never anything there. Just the dark outline of the forest against the night sky. The next morning, I got up early and went to the spot where I'd seen the creature. I don't know what I expected to find. Footprints, maybe. But the ground there was covered in pine needles and pretty hard-packed. There was no sign that anything had been there. For the next few weeks, I didn't play in the backyard alone. I stayed closer to the house or rode my bike up and down our long driveway instead. Eventually, as kids do, I started to convince myself that maybe I had imagined it, or that it had been some weird trick of the light or shadow. But I never fully believed that. Even now, 15 years later, I remember it too clearly for it to have been my imagination. The way it looked at me, that strange stillness, the absolute silence. It was all too real. I've read about Bigfoot sightings over the years. Washington State has lots of them. But what I saw doesn't really match the descriptions I've read. This wasn't some big, lumbering ape man. It was something different, more deliberate, watchful. And that skin, that grayish, tough-looking skin. I've never read about anything like that in Bigfoot reports. Sometimes I wonder if it was watching me before that day. If it had been there in the trees other times when I was playing, just observing. That thought still gives me chills. We moved away from that house about 2 years later when my dad got a job in Oregon. I remember feeling relieved, but also strangely sad. Like I was leaving behind some mystery I'd never solve. I've gone camping many times since then. I've spent plenty of time in forests all over the Pacific Northwest. But I've never felt comfortable with my back to the trees. I'm always aware of what's behind me, always listening for that unnatural silence that falls when something's watching you. I've never seen it again, whatever it was, but sometimes when I'm alone in the woods, I get that same heavy feeling in the air, that sense that something is there, just out of sight. And I wonder if it's still out there, standing behind trees, watching people who don't know they're being watched. I don't know what I saw that day. I don't have a name for it. But I know it was real, and I know it saw me too. And sometimes that's the part that bothers me the most. Not that I saw it, but that it was interested enough to stop and look at me. Like it was trying to figure me out as much as I was trying to figure it out. That day has stuck with me for 15 years. It's one of my clearest childhood memories. The blue sky, the smell of pine, the silence, and those dark eyes watching me from behind the tree. I don't think I'll ever forget it. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to. It was the day I realized that maybe we don't know everything about the world we live in. That maybe there are things out there living alongside us that we just don't understand. Story 9. I've been carrying this memory for 51 years now. I've never told anyone outside my family about it, and even then, only twice. The first time was when it happened, and the second was at my grandfather's funeral when my cousin Pete and I finally acknowledged it again after decades of silence. I'm only writing this now because Pete passed away last month, and I feel like I need to get this off my chest before I follow him. It was the summer of '72. I was 7 years old, and my grandfather had promised to take me and my cousin Pete fishing at Lake Tyler East. Pete was 3 years older than me, which felt like a huge gap at that age. I idolized him and was so excited when I found out he was coming along. I remember that morning so clearly. Grandpa picked us up before sunrise in his old Ford pickup. It smelled like tobacco and fishing tackle, and the vinyl seats were cracked and sticky against my bare legs. I had my favorite blue bucket hat on, the one with little fish embroidered around the brim. Mom had packed us peanut butter sandwiches wrapped in wax paper and a thermos of sweet tea. The sun was just starting to come up as we drove. turning the sky this weird pink-orange color that made everything look different. We were on County Road 23030, heading toward our usual spot. The windows were down, and I remember the humid summer air rushing in, carrying the smell of pine trees and wet earth. This part of East Texas was pretty undeveloped back then. Just acres and acres of woods, some scattered farms, and not much else. No houses for miles on that stretch. We probably passed maybe 2 other cars the whole drive. The road was nothing but packed dirt with grass growing down the middle, where tires didn't usually hit. I was sitting in the middle of the bench seat between Grandpa and Pete, bouncing with excitement about catching the big one today. Pete was quiet, kind of half asleep still, leaning against the passenger door. Grandpa was humming some old country song I didn't know, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a horse or maybe a cow that had gotten out of somebody's pasture. It was about 100 yards away, near the edge of a tree line to our right. The morning light was still dim, and there was this light fog hanging over the fields, so things were kind of hazy. "Grandpa, look at that horse," I said, pointing through the windshield. He glanced in the direction I was pointing, but kept driving. "Where, Tommy?" "Over there, by the trees." As we got closer, I realized something wasn't right. The way it was moving. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever seen. It was walking on 2 legs, not 4. But it wasn't a person either. This thing was grayish-white, but not a clean white, more like a dirty, mottled color. And the way it walked was all wrong. It had this weird swaying motion, like its hips were too loose or something. Its legs weren't straight. They had this constant bend to them, like it was in a permanent squat. But the arms were what really got me. They swung way too much with each step, almost like they were disconnected from the body. By now, we were maybe 50 yards away, and Grandpa had slowed the truck down a little. Pete had noticed it too, and was sitting up straight, pressing himself against the door, like he was trying to get as far away as possible. "What is that?" Pete whispered, and I remember his voice cracking. The creature must have heard the truck, because it suddenly stopped and turned toward us. But it didn't turn like a person or an animal would. Its whole upper body twisted in this stiff, mechanical way, like its spine couldn't bend normally. When it faced us, I could see it better. Its hair wasn't really hair like ours. It was short, maybe an inch long, but really thick and matted in places. Its face didn't have any hair at all, and the skin there was different. This super dark brown color, almost like wet soil after a heavy rain. I could see its hands had the same dark coloring on the palms. The scariest part was its head. It didn't really have a neck. The head just kind of sat directly on its shoulders, and it wasn't round like a human head. It was slightly pointed at the top. When it saw us, it didn't run, but it definitely moved faster. With one single stride, just one, it stepped clean over a 4-foot fence without even breaking its rhythm. Then it was gone, disappeared into the woods like it had never been there at all. The whole thing lasted maybe 20 or 30 seconds, but it felt like time had stopped. I remember the silence in the truck afterward. The only sound was Grandpa's breathing, which had gotten heavier. "Grandpa, did you see that horse walking on its back legs?" I asked, my voice sounding tiny and strange. He didn't answer right away. He slowed the truck almost to a stop, looked in the direction where the creature had vanished, then suddenly turned the wheel hard. We did a U-turn right there on the narrow road and headed back the way we'd come. "We're not going fishing?" I asked, confused and a little disappointed. "Not today, Tommy," he said, and his voice was different, tight, serious. We drove in silence for maybe 5 minutes before he spoke again. "Listen to me, both of you," he said, not taking his eyes off the road. "Never mention what you saw to anyone. People will think you're crazy. They'll call you liars, and they'll never believe you." "But what was it, Grandpa?" I asked. "I don't know," he said, and that scared me more than anything, because Grandpa always had answers for everything. When we got back to my house, Grandpa told my mom that Pete wasn't feeling well, so we decided to come back early. It wasn't until we were inside that I noticed Pete had been crying silently. He didn't say a word for the rest of the day, and when his parents came to pick him up, he wouldn't look at me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that thing in my mind, the way it moved, how tall it was. I figured it had to be at least 8 feet tall. And heavy. Too, probably 400 pounds at least, but it moved so easily, so fluidly, despite its weird gait. I pulled the covers over my head and tried to convince myself it had just been a man in a costume. But I knew better. The next time we went to Lake Tyler East, we took a completely different route. Grandpa never drove down County Road 23030 again, at least not with me in the car. And we never, ever talked about what we saw that day. Years passed. I grew up, went to college, got married, had kids of my own. Sometimes I'd have dreams about that creature, and I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the image of its pointed head and those swinging arms fresh in my mind. I'd almost convinced myself it had been some kind of childhood imagination, a deer or bear that my 7-year-old mind had distorted into something more sinister. Then came Grandpa's funeral in 2008. After the service, Pete and I found ourselves alone on the porch of Grandpa's house. We were both in our 40s by then. Pete was smoking a cigarette, something I'd never seen him do before. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked suddenly, not looking at me. I didn't have to ask which day. "Sometimes," I admitted. "I've never told anyone," he said. "Not even my wife. Just like Grandpa said." "Me neither." Pete took a long drag on his cigarette. "I've looked it up, you know, over the years. Tried to figure out what it might have been. And nothing fits. Nothing I could find, anyway." He paused. "It wasn't human, Tommy." "I know," I said. "And it wasn't an animal either. At least not any kind we know about." We stood there in silence for a while. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across Grandpa's yard. "You know what bothers me the most?" Pete finally said. "It saw us. It recognized we were there. It understood we were watching it." He shuddered visibly. "It had intelligence in its eyes." That was the last time we ever discussed it. Pete moved to Arizona a few years later, and we only saw each other at family gatherings after that. When I heard he'd died of a heart attack last month, one of my first thoughts was that now there were only 2 people left who knew what we'd seen that day. Me and whatever that thing was. I've spent a lot of time researching since then. Bigfoot sightings, cryptids, local folklore. Nothing matches what we saw. Most Bigfoot descriptions talk about hair covering the entire body, not just the head. And they don't mention that weird mechanical movement or the arms that swung too much. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, walking through the East Texas woods with that strange swaying gait. I wonder if other people have seen it over the years and, like us, kept quiet about it. I've thought about going back to that spot on County Road 23030 just to see if there's any trace of it left. But something always stops me. Fear, I guess. Not just fear of seeing it again, but fear of not seeing it, of finding nothing and having to face the possibility that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't real after all. But I know what I saw. Pete knew what he saw. And Grandpa, well, Grandpa knew enough to turn that truck around and never go back. I'm 72 years old now. I've got grandkids of my own, and sometimes when I take them fishing, I catch myself scanning the tree lines, watching for movement. I never take them to Lake Tyler East, and I've never told them why. I'm breaking my promise to Grandpa by writing this down, but I think he'd understand. Some burdens are too heavy to carry alone, and with Pete gone, I'm the only one left who remembers. The only one who knows that on a summer morning in '72, something impossible walked out of the woods, looked at us with knowing eyes, and then disappeared, leaving nothing behind but a memory that's haunted 3 generations of my family. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Grandpa was right about that, but it happened. It was real. and I've never been able to explain it. Story 10. See, I still can't believe I'm finally writing this down. It's been over 40 years, but what happened that night in 1979 still wakes me up sometimes, covered in sweat with my heart pounding. I've only told a handful of people about it over the years. Most just laugh or give me that look. You know the one, like I'm either lying or crazy. But Burke knows. He was there, and his dog Stuart knew too. My mom had just bought this old ranch property in rural San Diego County, 17 3/4 acres of mostly overgrown land with a few rundown buildings. It wasn't much to look at, but for a 15-year-old kid, it was like having my own wilderness to explore. The property overlooked thousands of acres of marshland and chaparral that stretched all the way west to a saltwater lagoon. There was this creek running through it with cattails and brush so thick you couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. Burke was the caretaker who lived in one of the smaller buildings on the property. He was in his 20s, had this scraggly beard, and always wore the same faded denim jacket. He knew everything about the land, where to find the best blackberries, which parts of the creek had the biggest bullfrogs, how to track the rabbits and coyotes that moved through the brush. His dog Stuart was always at his heels, this medium-sized mutt with patches of black and brown who'd follow Burke anywhere. That night in late September, we decided to go bullfrog hunting. If you've never done it, it's pretty simple. You head out after dark with flashlights and air rifles, shine the light in the frog's eyes to stun them. And then, well, you know, we'd done it dozens of times that summer, and I'd gotten pretty good at moving quietly through the marsh. We set out around 9 at night. The moon was just a sliver, barely giving any light, so we relied on our flashlights. It was unusually quiet. No crickets, no distant traffic from the highway. Just the squish of our boots in the mud and the occasional plop of something small dropping into the water. Burke led the way with Stuart, and I followed, my pellet gun slung over my shoulder. We had this path we'd worn down over the summer, winding through the cattails and around the worst of the mud. It wasn't much, but it was better than trying to force your way through that tangle of brush and thorns. The creek widened into a series of small ponds as it got closer to the lagoon, and the first pond, about a quarter mile from the house, was usually where we found the biggest bullfrogs. We were about halfway to the first pond when Stuart stopped suddenly. His ears perked up and he turned to look behind us. Burke didn't think much of it at first. There were always animals moving around out there. But then Stuart started growling, and this wasn't his normal, "I see a rabbit" growl. This was deep in his chest, his whole body tense. "What's he hearing?" I whispered. Burke just shook his head and put a finger to his lips. That's when we heard it too, crashing through the brush behind us. Not small movements like a raccoon or even a coyote. This was violent, powerful movement, breaking branches and shoving through cattails like they were nothing. Stuart's growl got louder, and Burke grabbed him by the scruff, putting his hand around the dog's muzzle. "Quiet," he hissed. Whatever was behind us stopped. It was maybe 50 feet away, just off our little path. We could hear it breathing, deep, heavy breaths. Then this weird sniffing sound, like it was trying to catch our scent, and then a strange whine, not like any animal I'd ever heard. It was almost frustrated. We stood frozen for what felt like forever. My legs were shaking so bad I thought I might fall over. Burke's face was white, his eyes wide in the dim reflection of our lowered flashlights. Then it made this sound, this angry woof noise, and started moving again. But not away from us, toward us, breaking through branches, splashing through shallow water, getting closer. Burke's hand must have slipped because suddenly Stuart was barking, these frantic, terrified barks, and whatever was coming toward us picked up speed. I don't know what made me do it. Fear, I guess. Pure instinct. But I raised my flashlight and pointed it directly at the sound. And that's when I saw it. God, I can barely type this even now. It was enormous, standing upright on 2 legs, covered in hair, dark reddish-brown hair all over its body. But its face, Its face was lighter, almost white in the beam of my flashlight. Same with its hands and feet. Massive hands with fingers longer than mine. Its eyes caught the light and reflected back, yellow-green, like a cat's, but bigger. So much bigger. For one endless second, we just stared at each other. Me, Burke, Stuart, and this creature. This impossible thing that couldn't exist in San Diego County, couldn't exist anywhere. Then it took this deep, deep breath, its chest expanding to twice its size, and it screamed. It wasn't like anything I've ever heard before or since, not like a person or an animal. It was like the sound itself was a physical force. It hit me so hard my ears actually overloaded. They started throbbing and ringing. The creature's mouth opened impossibly wide, like a hinge unhinging, and I could see teeth, large teeth. Not fangs like a predator, but not human teeth either. And it was screaming right in my face, not 3 feet away from me. I don't remember pulling the trigger. I just remember the click of my pellet gun going off and the creature flinching, not in pain, but in surprise. Then it was moving again. Not toward us this time, but away, plowing through water and trees and brush like they weren't even there. Heading west, deeper into the marsh, toward where the freshwater creek met the saltwater lagoon. Burke grabbed my arm and yanked me back toward the house. Stuart was already gone, running full speed ahead of us. We ran like we've never run before or since, stumbling, falling, getting up, not even caring about staying on the path, just desperate to get away. When we finally reached the yard, we collapsed on the grass, gasping for breath. Neither of us could speak. My ears were still ringing from that scream. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. What was that? I finally managed to ask. Burke just shook his head. I don't know. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. We tried to rationalize it at first. Maybe it was a bear, we said, even though there hadn't been bears in San Diego County for 100 years. Maybe it was someone playing a prank in a costume. Maybe we were both seeing things in the dark, but we both knew what we'd seen. It was over 7 feet tall. It was covered in hair. It walked on 2 legs. It had a face that was almost human, but not quite. And it had screamed with a voice that no human throat could possibly produce. We'd seen a Bigfoot in San Diego County, of all places, in 1979. The next day, in the harsh light of morning, we went back. I don't know why. Maybe to prove to ourselves that we'd imagined it. The path was there. The ponds were there. But there was also a new trail, a swath of broken cattails and trampled brush heading west toward the lagoon. Whatever had made that path had to be massive and incredibly strong. Those cattails were tough. You couldn't just push through them. And there were footprints. Not clear ones. The ground was too soft and muddy for that. But depressions. Big depressions. Bigger than Burke's boots. Spaced far apart, like whatever made them had been running on 2 legs. We followed the trail as far as we dared, which wasn't very far. It led straight into the densest part of the marsh, where the fresh water and salt water mixed. A place so thick with vegetation that even we, who knew the land better than anyone, never ventured. And the craziest part, the thing had gone through there in pitch darkness. No flashlight, no moon, just crashed through impenetrable brush in the middle of the night like it was nothing. We didn't go bullfrog hunting again that fall, or ever, really. Burke and I didn't talk about it much after that, but things changed. We'd be working on the property, and one of us would suddenly stop and look toward the marsh. Stuart refused to go near that path again. He'd whine and pull at his leash if Burke tried to take him that way. I told my mum we'd seen a mountain lion, just to explain why we weren't going down to the creek anymore. She believed me. It was easier than the truth. Over the next year, I'd sometimes stand on the back porch at night, looking out over the dark expanse of marsh, wondering if it was still out there. Sometimes I thought I heard distant splashing or breaking branches. Once, I swear I heard that same strange whine carried on the wind. We sold the property when I was 16 and moved closer to the city. I was relieved, honestly. Burke stayed in the area, found another caretaking job on a different property. We lost touch over the years. I've read accounts of other Bigfoot sightings since then. Some of them sound a lot like what we experienced. The height, the hair, the scream that seems to physically hit you. Some people describe them as curious, even peaceful. Ours wasn't. Ours was angry, territorial, powerful beyond anything I can adequately explain. I know how this sounds. Believe me, I do. If someone told me this story, I'd probably roll my eyes too. Bigfoot in San Diego? Come on. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard, and sometimes when I'm camping or hiking and the woods get too quiet, I find myself scanning the trees, listening for that heavy breathing, that strange whine. And I remember how it felt to have that creature scream in my face, the sound so loud it became physical, the breath hot and wet and smelling like rotting vegetation and something else I couldn't identify. I don't know what it was doing there, so far from where these things are usually spotted. I don't know if it's still there or if it moved on long ago. But I know it was real as the keyboard I'm typing on right now, as real as the goosebumps that still rise on my arms when I think about that night. And sometimes I wonder if it remembers us too. Story 11. I've spent most of my 65 years in the woods of northern Michigan, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened last November. Even now, nearly a year later, I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about those 15 seconds that changed everything I thought I knew about our forests. For background, I've been hunting these woods since I was 10. My dad taught me, his dad taught him, and I've passed everything down to my son and now my grandson, Caleb. The kid's only 11, but already has better instincts than most adult hunters I know. Sharp eyes, patient, and respectful of nature, all the things you want in a hunting partner. He'd been begging me to take him deer hunting all season, and with his parents' permission, I finally agreed to take him out to Claybank Swamp. Now, most locals avoid Claybank. It's remote, the terrain is difficult, and something about it just feels off. But that's exactly why I like it. Fewer hunters means more deer. I've been hunting that particular section for over 20 years without incident, which is why I felt comfortable bringing Caleb there on November 14th, 2009. The day started normally enough. We arrived at my usual spot around 5:30 in the morning, still dark. I remember Caleb was half asleep in the passenger seat, bundled up in more layers than necessary. The temperature was in the low 30s, cold but manageable. I parked my old Ford F-150 at the logging road entrance, and we hiked about a mile into my favorite blind. I'd built this blind myself years ago, reinforced it every season. It's nothing fancy, just a simple wooden structure with enough space for 2 people, camouflaged with local materials. From there, we had a clear view of a natural clearing where deer often crossed between feeding areas. The morning was uneventful. We saw a few does early on, but I wanted Caleb to hold out for something better for his first deer. Around noon, we ate the sandwiches my daughter had packed for us. I remember Caleb asking me if I'd ever seen anything strange in these woods. Kids always want ghost stories, you know. I told him about the time I thought I saw a mountain lion, even though they're supposedly extinct in Michigan. Nothing that would scare him, just enough to keep things interesting. As afternoon wore on, the sky began to cloud over. By 4 o'clock, I was checking my watch more frequently. November days are short up here, and I don't like being in the deep woods after dark, especially not with my grandson. Around 4:30, I made the call to pack it in. Caleb was disappointed. He'd been so patient all day, but he didn't argue. We gathered our gear and started the hike back to the truck. The light was fading fast, that strange twilight where the forest transforms. Hunters call it the witching hour, when shadows play tricks and everything seems to move in your peripheral vision. The swamp to our right was already pitch black, and the temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees since midday. We'd only made it about 50 yards from our blind when it happened. First came the sound, crashing underbrush, the unmistakable rhythm of a running deer. I instinctively raised my rifle, thinking we might get lucky after all. Caleb froze beside me, his eyes wide with excitement. A 6-point buck burst from the thicket to our left, running full tilt. Not the casual trot of a deer moving between feeding spots. This animal was in full panic mode. It passed within 20 feet of us, so close I could see its rolling eyes and the steam from its nostrils. It didn't even register our presence, which is unusual. Deer have incredible senses. They always notice hunters. "Grandpa, shoot!" Caleb whispered urgently. But I didn't raise my rifle. Something felt wrong. That deer wasn't running from us. It was running from something else. That's when I saw it. About 6 feet behind the deer, moving through the forest with impossible speed, was, I don't even know what to call it, a creature, massive and black, covered in what looked like dark fur. It was upright but hunched forward, arms, not front legs, actual arms, outstretched toward the fleeing deer. It was gaining on the buck with each powerful stride. The thing was tall, at least 8 feet, maybe more, built like a linebacker but impossibly large. The proportions were all wrong for a bear, and the movement was nothing like any animal I've ever seen in 40+ years of hunting. Bears don't chase deer like that. Nothing chases deer like that. What happened next is burned into my memory. The creature suddenly turned its head toward us, and for a split second, our eyes met. I swear to God there was intelligence in that gaze, and surprise. It was as startled to see us as we were to see it. In that moment of mutual recognition, everything seemed to stop. I felt a pressure in my chest like I couldn't breathe. My fingers tightened on my rifle, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare. The deer continued southwest, disappearing into the dense undergrowth. But the creature, it made a decision. It changed direction immediately, veering southeast away from us and the deer. It moved with purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going. Within 15 seconds, it had vanished completely into the forest. No sound, no disturbance, nothing, just gone. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, feel the pulse pounding in my temples. Beside me, Caleb was trembling. "Holy crap, Grandpa! Did you see that big black thing?" he finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yep," was all I could respond. My mouth had gone completely dry. I kept the safety off my Remington 700 as we started walking again, much faster than before. Every nerve in my body was on high alert. Caleb kept looking back over his shoulder, and I noticed my own eyes scanning the trees constantly. "What was that thing?" he asked after a few minutes. "Was it a bear?" "I don't think so," I said honestly. No point lying to the kid about what we'd seen, though part of me wished I could. "Can we go look for tracks?" he asked, that childhood curiosity momentarily overriding his fear. "Absolutely not," I said firmly. I had this overwhelming certainty that the creature hadn't gone far. It had just retreated enough to avoid us, and was probably circling back for that deer once we were gone. Some deep primal part of me knew we were being watched, assessed. I wasn't about to put my grandson at risk to satisfy curiosity. The mile back to the truck felt like 10. Every snap of a twig made me flinch. The forest that had always been my second home suddenly felt alien and threatening. I kept Caleb in front of me the whole way, where I could see him. When we finally reached the truck, I practically shoved him inside and locked the doors immediately. My hands were shaking so badly I struggled to get the key in the ignition. As we pulled away, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that thing emerge from the tree line. The drive home was mostly silent. Caleb asked a few questions I couldn't answer. Was it Bigfoot? Had I ever seen anything like it before? Did I think it would have hurt us? I told him I didn't know, but what I didn't say was how unnatural that thing had felt. This wasn't just an undiscovered animal. Whatever we saw didn't belong in those woods, didn't belong in this world. When we got back to my daughter's house, I made a Decision I'm not proud of. I told Caleb not to mention what we'd seen to his parents or friends. They'll just think we're crazy, I explained. Some things are better kept between hunters. The real reason was I didn't want him to become the weird kid at school who claimed he saw a monster. Kids can be cruel. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying those 15 seconds in my head. The speed of that thing, the intelligence in its eyes, the deliberate way it changed course when it saw us. I've encountered bears, wolves, coyotes, hell, even that possible mountain lion once. Nothing has ever made me feel like prey before. I went back the next day, alone. I told myself I was being stupid, but I had to know if there were tracks, had to prove to myself that what we saw was flesh and blood. The area where we'd seen the creature was muddy enough that anything that size should have left clear impressions. There were deer tracks, exactly where expected, but where that thing should have left prints there was nothing, just undisturbed forest floor. I searched for over an hour, expanding my search area, looking for broken branches, fur, anything. Nothing. It's been almost a year now. I haven't been back to Claybank Swamp, and I don't plan to go. I've made excuses when Caleb asks to go hunting there. We stick to the public land near town now, where there are always other hunters within shouting distance. Caleb still brings it up sometimes when his parents aren't around. "Do you think that thing is still out there, Grandpa?" he'll ask. I always change the subject. The truth is, I do think it's still out there. And I think there are some corners of these woods where humans aren't meant to go, some predators we aren't meant to see. I've spent my whole life in these forests, thought I knew every creature that called them home. Now I realize I know nothing. I don't know what we saw that day. I don't know if it would have harmed us if we'd pursued it. All I know is that for 15 seconds, I glimpsed something that shouldn't exist, something that turned the world I thought I understood completely upside down. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder, if it was hunting that deer so efficiently, what else might it hunt? Story 12. I still get chills thinking about what happened that day in the forest. This was back in early spring of 2021, when me and my 18-year-old twin daughters, Ava and Olivia, were out in my pickup truck collecting rocks in the Ozark National Forest. We live in northern Arkansas, and I've been in these woods my whole life. But nothing prepared me for what we saw. It had been raining most of the afternoon, not heavy, just that light drizzle that makes everything smell like wet earth. We were driving along this 2-track trail I've used dozens of times before, looking for good-sized rocks for a fire pit I was building in our backyard. The girls were excited to help. They've always been outdoorsy, taking after their old man, I guess. The truck was crawling up this small rise in the trail when it happened. I remember the windshield wipers squeaking across the glass, and Ava was talking about college applications when we all just went silent at the exact same moment. This thing just charged across the trail about 30 yards ahead of us. I slammed on the brakes so hard the girls jerked forward in their seats. My heart was pounding like it was trying to escape my chest, but my brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. It wasn't a glimpse or a shadow between trees. This was a full, clear sighting in broad daylight. The creature was massive, walking upright on 2 legs, but it wasn't a bear. I've seen plenty of bears in my life. This thing stood at least 9 feet tall, maybe taller. It was covered in long black hair that hung from its body, except for this distinct white patch along its upper back near the shoulder area. The contrast made it impossible to miss. The way it moved was wrong. It leaned forward as it ran, with these incredibly long arms swinging at its sides. I swear those arms were so long they could almost touch the ground. And it wasn't lumbering or awkward. It moved with this terrifying grace and speed that something that size shouldn't be capable of. "Dad, what the hell is that?" Olivia whispered. Her voice sounded so small. I couldn't answer. My mouth was dry and my hands were locked on the steering wheel. Despite all the hair covering it, you could see the muscle definition in its limbs and torso. This wasn't some scrawny animal. It was powerful, like a bodybuilder wrapped in fur. It never turned to face us directly, so I couldn't make out facial features, but that wasn't even the strangest part. Behind this creature, following its exact path, was a large grey wolf I recognized. I've spotted this particular wolf in these woods before, distinctive markings, larger than average. But instead of chasing or hunting this bipedal thing, the wolf seemed to be accompanying it, like they were traveling together. The creature actually outpaced the wolf as they both disappeared up the opposite hillside. I've never seen anything move that fast through rough terrain, especially something that size. After a few seconds of stunned silence, I snapped out of it and hit the gas. I had to see more, had to confirm what we'd just witnessed. But by the time we reached the spot where they'd crossed, both animals had vanished completely. We sat there in the truck for maybe 15 minutes, engine idling, all of us scanning the tree line. "Did you both see that?" I finally asked, still not believing it myself. The girls nodded, their faces pale. Ava was gripping her phone like she wanted to call someone, but didn't know who. "It wasn't a person in a costume," Olivia said firmly. "No way. Nothing human moves like that." She was right. Whatever we saw wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal native to these woods that I've ever encountered in my 47 years here. We eventually drove home, barely speaking the whole way. It rained hard that night, pouring down in sheets. When I went back the next day alone, any tracks that might have been there were completely washed away. I searched for hours, looking for broken branches, hair caught on thorns, anything, but found nothing conclusive. But here's the thing. This wasn't our first strange experience in those woods, just the most dramatic. About 3 months before, in winter, we'd found these large tracks in a muddy area near a creek. 4-toed prints, different sizes, like maybe a family group. They weren't bear tracks. I know what those look like. These were wider, with a different toe arrangement. We've also come across these weird structures deep in the forest, teepee formations made of large branches and small trees that couldn't have formed naturally. Once we found a full-sized pine tree, maybe 30 feet tall, jammed upside down into the ground with such force that it stood there like some bizarre monument. No storm could do that. The roots were pointing straight up toward the sky. After our sighting, I finally got in touch with this guy who researches Bigfoot encounters in the Ozarks. I was hesitant at first. I'm not the type to buy into conspiracy theories or monsters, but I needed answers. He came out to the property, looked at photos I'd taken of those tree structures, and walked the area where we had the sighting. He seemed genuinely impressed by what we showed him and told us that the Ozarks have a long history of similar reports. The detail about the wolf really interested him. He said there have been scattered accounts of large canids seemingly working with these creatures. But such clear sightings of that behavior are extremely rare. The researcher asked if we'd heard any unusual sounds in the area. That's when the girls mentioned the roaring. It's happened several times, mostly during deer season in the fall. This deep, guttural roar that echoes through the valley. Not a bear, not a mountain lion, nothing I can identify. It's loud enough to make your chest vibrate if you're close enough. We're not the only ones who've heard it either. There's an old man who lives deeper in the woods than we do, real hermit type. I ran into him at the general store about a week after our sighting and worked up the courage to ask if he'd heard anything strange lately. Without hesitation, he described what he called Tarzan-like whooping calls behind his cabin at night. Said it's been happening for years, but gets more frequent when hunters start moving through the woods. The whole experience has changed how I feel about these forests. I've been a hunter my whole life, spent countless nights camping under these same trees. Now, when darkness falls, I find myself listening differently, watching the tree line with new awareness. I installed better security lights around our property and got another dog. Our old lab just isn't much of a guard anymore. The girls won't go into the woods alone now. Olivia was planning to do a photography project out there for her senior year, but switched to shooting downtown architecture instead. Can't say I blame her. I've tried researching what we might have seen. The size and description match Bigfoot accounts, but the white patch on its back and the association with the wolf aren't typical features in most reports I've read. I wonder sometimes if there are different types of these creatures, or if what we saw was something else entirely. What bothers me most is the intelligence the situation implied. If that wolf and that creature were traveling together, it suggests a level of cooperation that requires reasoning. The strategic placement of those tree structures we found suggests the same thing. These aren't just animals acting on instinct. It's been almost 2 years since that day, and I still haven't told many people. My brother thinks we saw a bear, despite my insistence about the upright posture and impossible arm length. A few friends hinted that maybe the rain affected our visibility or played tricks with shadows, but all 3 of us saw the exact same thing in clear detail. I went back to that spot dozens of times over the following months. Never saw the creature again, but twice I found trees freshly broken at heights no human could reach. Once, about 5 months after our sighting, I found a deer carcass high up in a tree fork, about 12 feet off the ground. No scavenger we have around here could or would do that. The last time I went deep into those particular woods was last November. I was bow hunting alone at dawn, sitting in my tree stand. As the sun started to rise, I had this overwhelming feeling of being watched. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. The hair on my neck stood up, and I had this primal urge to get down and leave immediately. As I was climbing down, I heard heavy footsteps circling my position, just out of sight in the thick underbrush. Whatever it was big enough to make the ground vibrate slightly with each step. I got to my truck in record time and haven't been back to that specific area since. I'm not telling this story to convince anybody of anything. I know what we saw, and it's changed how I understand the world. These woods have secrets, and maybe some things are better left undisturbed. But I can't stop thinking about that creature and that wolf moving together through the forest like they had somewhere important to be, some purpose we couldn't comprehend. Sometimes at night, when the wind is blowing just right, I swear I can hear that whooping call in the distance. And every time, my new German shepherd stands at attention, staring out the window toward the dark line of trees, growling low in his throat at something my human eyes can't see. Story 13. I've been holding this in for over 25 years now, but I need to get it off my chest. Even typing this out makes my hands shake a little. Fall of 1997 is burned into my memory like a brand. I was 16, living with my parents on about 30 acres outside Butte, Montana. Our property was pretty isolated, mostly scrubland with a small pond and a swampy area that bordered the east side. An abandoned railroad line cut through the back of our land. My dad bought the place cheap because nobody wanted land with a right-of-way running through it, but it was perfect for me and my dirt bike. That old Kawasaki KX250 was my pride and joy. I'd saved up for it working summers at my uncle's garage. My parents weren't thrilled about it, but they let me ride as long as I stayed on our property and wore a helmet. Most evenings after finishing homework, I'd take it out for a quick spin before dinner. October 12th was a Monday. School had been crap that day, failed a math test, and this girl I liked started dating some senior football player. I just wanted to blow off steam, so around 7, I grabbed my helmet and headed out for a ride. The sun was already setting, but I knew our land like the back of my hand. I had a decent flashlight mounted on my helmet, and the bike's headlight worked fine. It was getting cold that time of year in Montana. I remember wearing my dad's old hunting jacket, too big for me, but warm. The night was clear with a quarter moon, and the air had that crisp fall smell. You know, that smell of leaves and dirt right before the first snow. I took my usual route down to the old railroad bed, opening up the throttle once I hit the straight section. Something about the sound of the engine and the wind in my face always cleared my head. After about 20 minutes of riding, I stopped at the far end of our property, where the railroad line disappeared into the neighbor's land. That's when Rusty, one of our mutts, came trotting up out of nowhere. We had 3 dogs that sort of came and went as they pleased on the property. Rusty was the friendly one, always following me around. I cut the engine and climbed off the bike, pulling off my helmet to let it hang on the handlebar. "Hey boy, what are you doing all the way out here?" I remember saying as I knelt down to pet him. He seemed nervous, which was weird for Rusty. His ears were perked up and he kept looking back toward the swamp. I figured maybe he'd spooked a deer or something. I clicked on my flashlight to see better since it was fully dark by then. Rusty was muddy, like he'd been digging or swimming in the pond. As I was checking him over, I heard something. A soft, splashing sound from the drainage ditch that ran alongside the railroad bed. I swung my flashlight toward the noise, not thinking much of it. Probably just another one of our dogs, or maybe a raccoon. What I saw in that beam of light has haunted me for 25 years. At first, I just saw a shape. Something big crouched down in the ditch about 30 yards away. It was hunched over, like it was drinking from the water. My first thought was bear, which was scary enough, but then it stood up. This thing was tall, way taller than any man I'd ever seen. 7 feet at least, maybe more. It had wide shoulders and was covered in dark hair or fur that looked matted and wet in the flashlight beam. But what I remember most clearly, what still wakes me up in cold sweats sometimes, were its eyes. When my light hit them, they reflected back this sickly greenish glow, like a cat's eyes, but much bigger and brighter. They weren't animal eyes. There was something aware in them, something that knew exactly what I was. For a second, we just stared at each other. Rusty started growling, which snapped me out of it. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I dropped the flashlight, scrambled onto my bike, and kicked it to life on the first try. I didn't even bother putting my helmet back on, just let it hang from the handlebar as I twisted the throttle all the way. The bike fishtailed in the loose gravel before catching traction. I glanced back once and nearly laid the bike down from the shock. The thing was running after me, not lumbering like a bear, actually running on 2 legs with long strides that ate up the ground between us. I've never ridden so fast in my life. The bike's headlight barely cut through the darkness enough for me to see the path. Branches whipped at my face as I left the railroad bed and cut across our property toward the house. Every few seconds I'd look back, and every time that thing was still there, keeping pace about 50 yards behind me. It moved wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. Too fluid for something that size. Too quiet. I could hear my bike engine screaming and my own ragged breathing, but this massive thing made almost no sound as it ran. I reached the area near our pond, pushing the bike as fast as it would go over rough terrain. In my panic, I didn't see the drainage ditch until it was too late. The front wheel hit it hard, and I went flying over the handlebars. The bike stalled out as I hit the ground, knocking the wind out of me. I lay there gasping for maybe 5 seconds, which felt like forever. When I managed to look up, the creature had slowed to a walk. It was just strolling toward me, taking its time now, like it knew I wasn't going anywhere. The way it moved, it was almost casual. Like a person approaching a wounded animal they didn't want to spook. I remember this weird moment of clarity through my panic. I thought, it could have caught me already if it wanted to. That was somehow more terrifying than if it had just attacked outright. My right arm was scraped up and bleeding, and my ankle hurt like hell. But adrenaline is a hell of a drug. I scrambled to my feet, limped to my bike, and somehow managed to get it upright. The Kickstarter was bent from the crash, but I knew I could pop the clutch if I could get it rolling downhill. The thing was maybe 30 yards away now, close enough that I could smell it, like wet fur and something rotten. I pushed the bike toward the slope that led down to our driveway, jumped on, and let gravity do its work. When I popped the clutch, the engine roared back to life, and I took off again. I was only about 400 yards from our house now. I could see the porch light. The creature was still behind me, running again. I was crying at this point, just desperate to get home. Then disaster struck again. The bike hit a rock or a root, I never knew which, and the front wheel twisted sideways. I went down hard, skidding along the dirt at the edge of our yard. The bike landed on my leg, pinning me for a moment before I managed to push it off. I knew I couldn't get the bike started again. The thing was still coming, now just walking steadily toward me. I abandoned the bike and ran the last 100 yards to our house on foot, my ankle screaming with every step. I looked back once more as I reached our gravel driveway. The creature had stopped at the edge of our yard, right where the floodlight's reach ended. It just stood there in the shadows, those green eyes fixed on me. It was so still, it almost looked like a tree at first glance. My dad had installed this massive security light on a pole near our garage. It was motion activated and bright enough to light up half our yard. I stumbled to the control box and flipped the override switch to turn it on manually. The yard flooded with harsh white light, and I saw the creature clearly for the first time. It was massive, not just tall, but broad, built like a linebacker, but covered in dark brown hair. Its face, God, its face was the worst part. Not quite human, not quite animal. The nose was flat and wide, the mouth slightly protruding. Those eyes narrowed against the sudden light, losing their green glow, but still fixed directly on me. For maybe 3 seconds, it just stood there, half in the light, half in shadow. Then it turned and walked, not ran, just calmly walked, back toward the swamp. Its movements were deliberate, almost human-like, but with a fluidity no person could match. I burst through our front door, hysterical. My parents thought we were being robbed or something. My mum kept asking what happened while my dad grabbed his shotgun. When I finally managed to tell them about the creature, my dad went outside to look around, while my mum cleaned up my cuts and scrapes. My dad found my bike where I'd left it, dragged it back to the garage, but saw no sign of any creature. He found some unusual tracks near the edge of the yard. Too big for a bear, he said, but convinced himself it was probably just a moose. We don't get many moose around Butte, but he needed it to make sense. The next day, my parents took me to the doctor because my ankle was swollen to twice its normal size. Turned out I'd sprained it pretty badly in one of the crashes. The doctor gave me crutches and told me to stay off it for a week. My dad and a couple neighbors went looking around the swamp area the next weekend, but found nothing unusual. Everyone chalked it up to me seeing a bear or maybe a large transient person who spooked me. After a while, I almost started believing them. Almost. But here's the thing that still haunts me. That creature never tried to catch me. It could have, easily, but it just followed, watching, like it was studying me or herding me back home, and the way it stopped exactly at the edge of our yard, like there was some invisible boundary it wouldn't cross. That wasn't animal behavior. I never rode my bike near the swamp again. I actually sold it the next summer and bought a car instead. I refused to go out to the back part of our property alone, especially after dark. For the rest of high school, I had nightmares about those glowing green eyes. Sometimes I still do. I've looked into local legends, cryptid sightings, everything I could find about the area. There are some old Native American stories about forest spirits and skinwalkers, but nothing that exactly matches what I saw. I've never seen the creature again, though sometimes when I visit my parents, they still live in the same house, I get this feeling of being watched when I'm outside at night. Maybe it's just paranoia, but I always make sure I'm back inside before dark. I don't know what followed me that night. I don't know why it chased me or why it stopped. All I know is that it was real. It was intelligent. And for some reason, it let me go. Story 14. I still think about it every time I go back home. It's been almost 50 years now, but I swear I can feel those eyes on me sometimes when I'm alone in the woods. I've never told this story outside my family until now, but I need to get it out. Maybe someone else has seen what I saw. This happened back in 75 or 76 during summer. I was 18, just graduated high school, and still living on my family's farm in northern Minnesota, about 35 miles west of Duluth. Our place was pretty typical for that area. 40 acres of fields for hay, some wooded patches and swampy lowlands near a stream that cut through the back corner of our property. Being Finnish, like a lot of families up there, we had a sauna. Not one of those electric ones people put in their basements now. This was a real wood-fired sauna my grandfather built, the traditional kind. It sat at the back of our property near that stream I mentioned, down in a little hollow where you couldn't see it from the road. Private, peaceful. I loved that spot. That day in July had been brutally hot, probably in the high 80s, and I'd been out haying since early morning. By evening, I was completely wiped out and covered in sweat, chaff, and dust. Dad and my brothers were heading into town for supplies, but I decided to stay behind and take a sauna to clean up and relax my aching muscles. I drove my pickup down the dirt track to the sauna around 7 in the evening. The sun was still up, but starting to get lower, casting those long summer shadows through the trees. I remember how quiet it was, just some birds, the stream gurgling nearby, and the occasional breeze rustling leaves. I got the fire going in the stove, filled the water bucket from the stream, and waited for the sauna to heat up properly. It took about 45 minutes to get hot enough. Meanwhile, I sat outside on the bench my dad had built, just enjoying the quiet and watching the steam start to curl out from under the eaves. Once it was ready, I stripped down, grabbed my towel, and went in. If you've never been in a traditional Finnish sauna, it's different from what most people think. The heat is intense but clean, not that stuffy, suffocating feeling you get in some steam rooms. I tossed water on the hot stones and the steam would rise up, making you sweat out every impurity. It's almost spiritual, not just a way to get clean. I stayed in for about 20 minutes, sweating out all the day's work, before stepping outside to cool off. This is completely normal in Finnish culture. You go in the hot sauna, then cool off outside, then repeat. Nobody was ever around to see me anyway. Our nearest neighbor was over a mile away, and the sauna was set back from the road, hidden by trees. The evening was starting to fade into that golden twilight we get in Minnesota summers. Must have been around 8:30 or 8:45. I was sitting on the bench outside the sauna, naked except for my towel beside me, feeling that incredible contrast between my overheated skin and the cooling evening air. Steam was still rising off my body. I was completely relaxed, eyes half closed, listening to the birds settling down for the night. That's when everything changed. It started with a feeling. You know that sensation when someone's watching you, how the hairs on your neck stand up before you even consciously realize what's happening. It hit me like that, sudden and intense. My eyes snapped open and I felt completely exposed, vulnerable in my nakedness. At first, I didn't see anything, just the trees, the sauna, the fading daylight. But the feeling was overwhelming. Something was watching me. I was sure of it. My first thought was that my brothers had doubled back to mess with me. They were always playing pranks, and catching me naked would have given them ammunition for jokes for years. So I looked toward the sauna building, thinking maybe they were hiding behind it. That's when I saw it. Above the eave of the sauna roof, peering down at me, was a head. Just a head at first, and shoulders. My initial thought was, it's Mike, my older brother. So I called out, "I see you, Mike. Real funny." But even as the words left my mouth, I knew it wasn't Mike. It wasn't anyone I knew. It wasn't even human. The sauna roof eave was about 6.5 feet high. I know because my dad was 6'2" and could just touch it with his fingertips when he reached up. But this thing was tall enough that its head and shoulders extended at least 2 or 3 feet above that eave, which meant it had to be standing 9 feet tall, maybe more. It was dark, not just in color, but like it absorbed the light around it. covered in what looked like hair or fur, but not like a bear's. Longer, shaggier. Its face was in shadow, but I could see the outline, more human-shaped than animal, with a pronounced brow ridge. And the eyes. God, the eyes. They reflected the last bit of daylight with a reddish-amber glow. I froze completely, couldn't move, couldn't scream, just sat there naked and vulnerable, staring at this impossible thing that was staring right back at me. For what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds, we just looked at each other. Then it moved. Not toward me, thank God. It disappeared behind the sauna, just ducked down out of sight. My brain was screaming at me to run, but I was still frozen. Part of me thought, maybe it's gone. The rational part of my mind was still trying to make sense of it. Bear standing on hind legs, some kind of prank? But I knew better. Then it appeared again, this time looking over the opposite eave of the sauna. It had moved silently around the building, about 20 feet, in just seconds. Now it was watching me from the other side. In that moment, I could see it more clearly. The shoulders were massive, easily twice as wide as mine. The head was proportional to that huge body, but seemed to sit directly on the shoulders without much of a neck. And though I still couldn't make out details of the face, I could tell it was watching me intently. My nudity suddenly felt like the worst vulnerability imaginable. I was completely exposed, no weapon, no protection, nothing between me and this thing but 15 feet of open yard. It ducked down again, disappearing behind the sauna once more. That's when my survival instinct finally kicked in. I knew if I ran for my truck, I'd have to pass by the corner of the sauna. What if it was waiting there? But staying put seemed even worse. I grabbed my towel, wrapped it around my waist, and made a split-second decision. Instead of heading straight for the truck, I bolted for the sauna door. My clothes were in the changing room, and at least inside I'd have walls around me. I've never moved so fast in my life. 3 huge strides, and I was through the door, slamming it behind me. There was no lock. We'd never needed one out here. So I leaned against it, gasping for breath, heart hammering so hard I thought it might break my ribs. The changing room was dim, just the last bit of daylight coming through a small window. I fumbled for my clothes, nearly falling as I yanked on my jeans and t-shirt. I didn't bother with socks or underwear, just shoved my feet into my work boots, not even lacing them. Then I realized my truck keys were in the pocket of my jeans. I had them. I could leave, but I'd have to go outside again. I pressed my ear to the door. Nothing, just the normal evening sounds. But that meant nothing. It had moved silently before. Taking the deepest breath I could, I threw the door open and ran. Didn't look left or right, just sprinted for my truck, fumbling with the keys. I dropped them once, snatched them up, and finally got the door open. The whole time I felt exposed, like at any second massive hands would grab me from behind. I jumped in, slammed and locked the door, and jammed the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I threw it in reverse, nearly hitting a tree as I backed up, then spun the wheel and floored it up the dirt track. The entire time, I was checking the mirrors, convinced I'd see it chasing after me. It took less than 2 minutes to reach our main farmhouse, throwing dust and gravel the whole way. I skidded to a stop in the yard just as my dad and brothers were coming out the front door, alarmed by the sound of my truck racing up the drive. "What the hell's wrong with you?" Dad asked. But one look at my face told him something serious had happened. I blurted it all out, probably not making much sense, but enough that they understood something had frightened me at the sauna. Dad went inside and came back with his shotgun. Mike and John grabbed theirs too, plus flashlights and the big gas lantern we used for power outages. We all piled into Dad's truck and drove back down to the sauna. The whole way, I was shaking, telling them exactly what I'd seen, trying to make them understand this wasn't a joke or my imagination. By the time we got there, it was almost fully dark. Dad and my brothers approached cautiously, shotguns ready, while I stayed in the truck, feeling both terrified and embarrassed. They searched the whole area, around the sauna, in the nearby woods, down by the stream. They found nothing but some flattened grass behind the sauna building. No footprints, no clear track. The ground was too grassy and dry to show prints anyway. After about 20 minutes, they came back to the truck. "Nothing there now," Dad said, but I could tell he believed something had been. He wasn't the type to dismiss his kids' fears. For weeks afterward, I wouldn't go down to the sauna alone. Eventually, the memory faded enough that I could convince myself maybe it had been a bear, though I knew damn well no bear stands 9 feet tall or moves like that. It wasn't until years later that I remembered something from when I was in elementary school. Our old bus driver, Mr. Lati, used to talk sometimes about seeing a tall, dark figure crossing the gravel roads on his early morning route. Most people laughed it off as the old man seeing things in the fog, but one time he'd stopped his empty bus and said he heard something huge moving through the timber, breaking branches that would have taken substantial strength to snap. I've thought about reporting it to one of those cryptid research groups, but I never have. What would I say? That I was sitting naked outside a sauna and Bigfoot was peeping at me? But I know what I saw. I've run it through my mind thousands of times over the years. What haunts me most isn't just that it was there, watching me. It's the intelligence I sensed behind those eyes. It wasn't just a curious animal. It was observing me deliberately, studying me. And sometimes, when I'm back home visiting the old farm, I still feel like something's watching me from the tree line. I never saw it again, but I've never forgotten those eyes, or the feeling of being studied like a specimen by something that should not exist. Story 15. I've been sitting on this experience for over 40 years now. Summer of '79. I was 15 and my buddy Eli was 14. We lived in Bosque County, Texas, real rural area where everybody knew each other and kids like us spent most of our free time outdoors. I still remember that day so clearly it might as well have happened last week instead of back when Carter was president. Me and Eli were crazy about hunting. Nothing serious, mostly squirrels and the occasional rabbit. Our parents let us go out with our .22 rifles as long as we were careful and back before dark. That day in July was hot as hell, must have been 95 degrees, but we didn't care. We'd been out since early morning, tramping through the woods about 5 miles from Eli's place. By around 5 in the afternoon, we were heading back. We'd gotten 3 squirrels, not our best day, but decent enough. Eli had his hunting dog with him, a black and tan coonhound named Rusty. That dog was fearless. I'd seen him corner angry raccoons twice his size without backing down an inch. He was the best hunting dog I'd ever seen, and Eli trained him from a pup. We decided to take the creek bed back to Eli's house. It was a shortcut, plus it was cooler down there with the trees providing shade on both sides. The creek banks were steep in that area, maybe 20 feet high, and we were walking along the mostly dry bottom. Just a trickle of water running down the middle. We were about halfway back, joking around like teenage boys do, when Rusty started acting weird. At first I didn't notice, but Eli did. "What's wrong with him?" Eli asked, and that's when I paid attention. Rusty was running up ahead maybe 30 feet, then racing back to us, whimpering. His tail was tucked between his legs. I'd never seen him act like that before. He did it again, ran up the creek bed, then back to us, whining. His ears were flat against his head. "Maybe he smells a skunk," I suggested, but Eli shook his head. "Nah, he doesn't act like this for skunks. Something's got him spooked." The third time Rusty ran ahead and back, he was really agitated. He was pressing against Eli's legs, trembling. Then, without warning, he took off running back the way we'd come, just bolted. I'll never forget the sound of his nails scraping on the rocks as he ran, or the way his whimpers echoed off the creek banks. "Rusty!" Eli called after him, turning around. "Rusty! Come back, boy!" But the dog was gone, disappeared around a bend in the creek. Eli was stunned. He's never done that before. Never. That's when I felt it. This weird sensation on the back of my neck, like someone was watching us. I turned back around and looked up at the rim of the creek bank, and that's when I saw it. Standing right at the edge of the bank, silhouetted against the late afternoon sun, was a figure. It was just standing there, completely still, looking down at us. The sun was behind it, so I couldn't make out details, but I could see its outline clear as day. I reached out and touched Eli's arm. He was still looking back for his dog. "Eli," I whispered, "look." He turned and followed my gaze up to the top of the bank. I felt him freeze beside me. "You see that?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Yeah," he whispered back. Whatever it was huge, tall, way taller than any man I'd ever seen. I'm not exaggerating when I say it had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe 7.5, and it was broad, massive shoulders and chest. My first thought was someone in hunting gear, maybe wearing one of those leaf suits, but it was way too big. The creek bank had an open field behind it, so there was nothing but sky behind this thing. That's why we could see its outline so clearly. It had a head that seemed to sit directly on its shoulders, no neck that I could see, and its arms hung down almost to its knees. I decided to try the friendly approach, thinking maybe it was just a really tall hunter or something. I raised my hand and waved. "Hey, there!" I called out. The figure didn't wave back or call out. Instead, it moved sideways behind a tree at the edge of the bank. The movement wasn't like a normal person walking. It was fluid, but somehow wrong. Too smooth or too quick, I can't really describe it. It moved behind this oak tree that was maybe 3 feet wide. We stood there waiting for it to come out the other side of the tree. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, nothing. I kept staring at that tree, expecting this figure to step back into view, but it never did. "Where'd it go?" Eli whispered. "I don't know," I replied. I was starting to feel real uneasy. It should have come out the other side of that tree by now. We stood there for at least 2 minutes, just staring up at that spot. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Something wasn't right. That thing should have reappeared from behind the tree, but it was like it had just vanished. "We should go," Eli said finally. "Yeah," I agreed. But here's the thing. To get to Eli's house, we needed to continue up the creek, right underneath where that thing had been standing. The thought of walking under that spot made my skin crawl. What if it was lying in wait for us? What if it had somehow moved to another position where we couldn't see it? Without discussing it, we both started backing up, keeping our eyes on the top of the bank. We backtracked maybe 100 yards, then Eli pointed to a less steep part of the bank. "We can climb out here and go around," he said. We scrambled up the side of the creek, our rifles slung over our shoulders, using roots and rocks as handholds. Once we were up, we started jogging across the fields, taking a wide berth around where we'd seen the figure. It added at least a mile to our journey, but neither of us wanted to go back to that creek bed. As we walked, we tried to make sense of what we'd seen. "That wasn't a person," Eli said. "No way." "Too big," I agreed. "Had to be at least 7 feet tall and wide, like I'm guessing 400, maybe 500 pounds. And did you see how it moved? That wasn't right." "Yeah." "And where did it go?" "That tree wasn't big enough to hide behind completely. We should have seen it come out the other side." "Rusty knew," Eli said quietly. "That's why he ran. He sensed something was wrong." The mention of Rusty made us both worry about the dog, but we were too scared to go looking for him. We kept looking over our shoulders the whole way back, half expecting to see that figure following us across the fields. The sun was getting lower, casting long shadows that kept making me jump. We finally made it back to Eli's house, just as it was getting dark. His mom was on the porch, looking worried. "Where have you boys been? I was about to send your dad out looking for you," she said to Eli. Then she noticed we were alone. "Where's Rusty?" "He ran off," Eli said. "Something spooked him." We didn't tell his parents what we'd seen. We were 15 and 14. We knew they'd think we were making it up or exaggerating. We just said we'd taken a wrong turn and gotten a bit lost. Rusty showed up at Eli's house around midnight, scratching at the back door. Eli said the dog was still acting strange the next day, wouldn't leave the house, kept growling at nothing. It was a week before he'd go back out hunting with us, and he was never the same after that. Always nervous, always looking around like he expected something to jump out at him. A few weeks later, we got curious and asked Eli's grandpa if he'd ever heard of anything strange in those woods. The old man got real quiet, then told us some stories about wild men that had supposedly been seen in Bosque County since before he was born. Tall, hairy creatures that lived in the forests and creek beds, watching people from a distance. He said his own father had seen one back in the 20s while hunting deer. I've gone over that day in my head thousands of times since then. I've considered every possibility, a hunter in camouflage, a local playing a prank, even a bear standing on its hind legs. But none of those explanations fit what we saw. The height, the build, the way it moved, the way it disappeared, and most of all, the way Rusty reacted. That dog wasn't afraid of anything, but whatever he sensed that day terrified him. I've never gone back to that specific creek bed. I moved away from Bosque County after high school and only visit occasionally to see family. Eli still lives there, and we talk about it sometimes when I visit. He hasn't been back to that spot either. I don't know what we saw that day. I don't have a name for it. All I know is that for a few minutes on a hot summer afternoon in '79, me and my best friend saw something that shouldn't have been there, something that didn't belong in our world. And 40+ years later, I still check over my shoulder when I'm walking alone in the woods. Story 16. I still haven't told many people about what happened that day in the Ozarks. It's been almost 5 years now, but I still get this cold feeling in my stomach when I think about it. Most folks would just laugh it off or say we were drinking too much, but we weren't. We were stone cold sober when it happened, and that makes it worse somehow. It was early November of 2018, right in the middle of that sweet spot before deer season officially opened. Me, Kyle, Damon, and Tyler had been planning our hunt for months. We always go out to scout locations before the season starts, checking game trails, looking for scrapes and rubs, setting up our trail cams. It's something we've done since high school, kind of our yearly tradition. That morning was perfect, cool but not cold. Maybe 50 degrees with a light breeze. We'd gotten up before sunrise and driven my old Jeep Cherokee deep into the Ozark National Forest, northwest. Arkansas area. We were about 12 miles down an old logging road, well away from the usual spots where weekend warriors set up their camps. After parking, we hiked about 2 miles to this little valley I'd found the previous year. It had everything you could want. A creek running through it, some open meadows, and thick woods with plenty of cover. Perfect deer habitat. We'd seen some promising signs along the way. Fresh droppings, a few scrapes under low-hanging branches. Tyler had even spotted some decent tracks crossing a muddy section of the trail. Around noon, we stopped at the creek to eat the sandwiches we'd packed. The water was clear and cold, running over smooth stones. The creek wasn't wide, maybe 15 feet across at most points, and on the other side was this dense cedar thicket that stretched up the hillside. The cedars were packed tight together, creating these dark shadows between the trunks. We were just sitting there on some rocks, bullshitting about work and stuff, when Kyle started tossing pebbles across the creek. You know how it is when you're out in the woods. You revert back to being like 12 years old. Soon we were all doing it, trying to hit specific trees or outdo each other with distance. Nothing serious, just passing time. I remember I'd just thrown a decent-sized rock, about the size of a baseball, into that cedar thicket when we heard it. This deep rumbling growl, not like a dog or a coyote, not even like a bear, though I've heard black bears before. This was deeper, louder, and it seemed to come from inside the thicket where I'd thrown that rock. We all froze. Nobody said anything for maybe 5 seconds. "What the hell was that?" Tyler whispered. "Probably just a bear," Damon said. but he didn't sound convinced. The cedars across the creek were really dense, making it hard to see more than a few feet into them. The sun was high overhead, but those trees created this wall of shadow. I was squinting, trying to see if I could spot anything moving when I saw it. At first I thought it was just a tree trunk, but then it moved, just a slight shift, but enough that I realized I was looking at something standing upright between two cedars, maybe 30 yards from the creek bank. It was tall, way taller than any of us, and we're not small guys. Tyler's 6'2", and whatever I was looking at was at least a couple feet taller than that. "Guys," I said, keeping my voice low, "don't make any sudden movements. Look across the creek, between those two bigger cedars." They all turned slowly. Tyler saw it first. I could tell because he sucked in a breath and grabbed my arm. "Is that a person?" Kyle whispered. But it wasn't. The silhouette was too big, too broad, and the way it moved wasn't right. It took a deliberate step to the side, still mostly hidden in the shadows, but I could see it was on two legs. The shape was all wrong for a human, though. The proportions were off, the shoulders too wide, the arms too long. We were all just staring, not knowing what to do, when we heard a loud crack, like a branch breaking. Not a small twig, but something substantial. Then, before any of us could react, something came flying out of the thicket toward us. A rock. The same damn rock I'd thrown over there, or one very similar. It sailed over the creek and splashed into the water about 6 feet from where we were sitting. "What the fuck?" Damon said, a little too loudly. My first thought was that some asshole hunters were messing with us. People can be jerks, especially when they think they've claimed a hunting spot and someone else shows up. "Hey!" I called out. "We don't want any trouble, we're just scouting." No response, just silence. Even the birds had stopped chirping, which I only noticed then because of how quiet it had gotten. Kyle, always the hothead, picked up the rock that had been thrown and hurled it back into the thicket. "Real mature dickheads," he shouted. That's when the growling came back. Louder this time. A deep, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate in my chest. It didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard, and I've spent my whole life in these woods. It sounded angry. Then more movement. The silhouette stepped forward, just enough that I could make out more of its shape. It was massive, broad-shouldered, and covered in what looked like dark fur or hair, not a bear standing up. Bears don't stand that straight, that still. This thing was just watching us. "Guys," Tyler whispered, "we need to go. Now." None of us argued. We started backing up slowly, gathering our packs. The thing across the creek didn't move, just stood there. Then Damon, who was closest to the tree line on our side, stumbled over a root and fell backward with a yelp. That sound seemed to trigger something. There was a series of loud cracks from the thicket, branches breaking with serious force. Not like something moving through undergrowth, but like something was snapping them deliberately. Then another rock came flying out, bigger this time, and it hit a tree just a few feet from Tyler with enough force to take off a chunk of bark. "Run!" I shouted, all thoughts of being calm gone. We didn't need to be told twice. We turned and sprinted back the way we'd come, along the creek bank and then up the trail toward where we'd left the Jeep. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. My lungs were burning, branches whipping my face as we crashed through the underbrush. I didn't look back. I was too scared of what I might see. I could hear the others panting and crashing through the woods behind me. Someone, I think it was Tyler, kept saying, oh shit," over and over. The worst part was that I could hear something else too. Movement in the woods, parallel to us, but on the other side of the creek. Heavy footfalls, breaking branches. It was following us. We reached a part where the trail turned away from the creek, heading up toward the ridge where we'd parked. As we made that turn, I heard a splash, like something large crossing the water. That's when I finally looked back. Through the trees, maybe 50 yards behind us, I saw it cross the creek in 2 giant strides. It was massive, at least 7 feet tall, moving with this strange rolling gait that was somehow both awkward and incredibly fast. The sun hit it just right for a second, and I saw dark, matted hair covering its body. Its arms were long, hanging down almost to its knees. I only saw it for maybe 2 seconds before the trail curved and blocked my view, but that was enough. That image is burned into my brain. I don't think any of us said another word. We just ran harder. The only sounds were our ragged breathing and the heavy crashing behind us, getting closer. The 2-mile hike that had taken us about 45 minutes that morning, we covered in what felt like 10 minutes. When we burst out of the tree line and saw my Jeep sitting there on the old logging road, I almost cried with relief. We piled in, and my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I started the engine, Tyler, who was in the passenger seat, suddenly pointed through the windshield. "There, there!" At the edge of the clearing, just where the trail entered the woods, something moved behind a large oak tree. Just a glimpse of that same dark shape, partially hidden. Then a fucking rock, came sailing out of the woods and hit my hood with a loud bang. I slammed the Jeep into reverse, spun it around, and floored it down that logging road. The whole way out, nobody spoke. We were all just breathing hard, looking out the windows, jumping at every shadow. Only when we hit the main road, with its blessed pavement and occasional passing cars, did anyone speak. "What the fuck was that?" Damon finally asked from the back seat. No one answered right away. What could we say? "It wasn't human," Tyler said finally. His voice was shaking. "It wasn't a bear either," Kyle added. "Bears don't throw rocks or stand like that," I said, "or follow like that. We tried to rationalize it on the drive home. Maybe it was some crazy hermit living in the woods. Maybe it was someone in a ghillie suit messing with us. But none of those explanations fit what we'd seen, what we'd heard. It's been almost 5 years, and I still don't know what we encountered that day. I've gone down internet rabbit holes looking for answers. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. I was never a believer in that stuff before. I'm still not sure I am now. All I know is what I saw, what we all saw. Something that wasn't human and wasn't any normal animal, but was standing on 2 legs, throwing rocks and breaking trees like they were twigs. We never went back to that spot. We still hunt, but never there, never alone, and we always carry more than just our usual gear now. Sometimes at night, I still hear that growl in my dreams. Deep, rumbling, angry. And I wonder if it's still out there, in those dark cedar thickets, waiting for someone else to throw a rock across the creek.